Let's get set up. I will call this meeting to order. And can we please get a roll call attendance?
Yes. Commissioner Foister.
Here.
West. Nelson. Is she on the video? Petroselli,
Yeah, here.
Chairperson Montague,
I'm here.
Mayor Clark,
Here.
and Mayor Pro Tem Meyer. Here.
Thanks. And now we have an introduction. Who's doing the introduction? All right.
Hello, everyone. Preston Neal, 381 North Laura Street, here in Ridgway. I am very excited to introduce Miss Angie Kemp. She's the new senior planner for the town of Ridgway. It only took 3.5 years to find an in-house planner. But again, she's in the role of senior planner, and I'll let her introduce herself. She comes to us from Stan Claus and Associates, and just to get out ahead of it, she's going to work in conjunction with TJ DeLubeck and his firm at CPS. TJ and company, they're not going away. We're just going to figure out a way to be efficient with everybody's time and the resources that we now have at our disposal. So Angie.
Should I come up there?
Why not?
Okay, why not?
Welcome.
Thank you. Yay. Thanks, everybody, for such a warm welcome. I already met some of the folks in the room, so that's great. CPS and your town manager have been amazing at getting me up to speed, so I really hope to be a good resource for the community. And I'm just really excited to be here.
It'd be so great to have an in-person, in-house planner.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
I get to hang out with dogs, so it's
So welcome aboard.
yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'll be around.
Thanks.
Thank you. Cool.
Very excited.
Next we go into public hearings. The first one is ordinance number 03-2024, amending section 7.4 zoning regulations of the Ridgway Municipal Code relating to accessory dwelling units. And as TJ and his team are here, I will turn it right over.
Thank
Max.
you. Thank you, Planning Commission. Yes, give me a moment to share my screen here, and we'll begin with, Preston, would you mind providing me?
Yeah, I forgot to do that. So.
We will start with the accessory dwelling unit standards.
That's the last step.
Add that to the list. All right, so the very first ordinance 2024-03 for accessory dwelling units, we're gonna go through the public hearing process. We put together a staff report that was included within the PC packet. There are some details in this slide deck that are go into more detail in the PC packet. We'll then go through commissioners' questions with staff, and then we'll open up the public hearing afterwards. So quickly summarize our staff report. Here's a quick summary of our process so far. And we had a kickoff with Planning Commission in January of this year with 4 code updates, one of which being the accessory dwelling units portion of the code. This has been part of the solution to address housing affordability in Ridgway. So we had a lot of back and forth on a code draft to come to a good solution for this town. And the primary objective there is to evaluate the current language that Ridgway had already adopted and consider best practices and some of the lessons learned from that implementation, and can recommend updates. So I'm going to go through some of those major changes. First one being that we reorganized it into 5 sections to make it easier to read. Those 5 sections are the general provisions, dimensional design standards, incentives, ownership and occupancy, and utilities. The second one is that we made ADUs permissible in areas that allow duplex and triplex uses. This is in addition to single family dwellings where they were already permitted. The next thing we recommend is the modifying the permissible quantities of ADUs on a property given its lot size. The first one being that an ADU is allowed on all lots between 3,000 and 7,500 square feet. The lower part of that range is the minimum lot size for for the residential zoning district. So this makes sure that all ADUs are encompassed within the residential zoning. 2 ADUs could be allowed on lots between 7,501 square feet and 15,000 square feet, and then anything exceeding that can have more than 2 ADUs, but they shall never, the total numbers of ADUs on property shall never exceed the amount that's permitted by the use. So for example, a duplex has 2 dwelling units, so you can never have more than double that on it. And anytime, and there are more details in the packet, but it is important to note that if there are more than 2 ADUs on the property, then we'll go through a site plan review process to keep it consistent with the town. As part of the general provisions, we added details about what we're incentivizing with ADU construction in terms of materials, sourcing. Added site plan review requirements for any properties that result in 2 or more ADUs, as I mentioned prior, and then establishing a framework for pre-approved ADU construction. It's important to note that that was a big discussion point in the prior months, but it is not part of this code update, and will be pursued outside of the adopted code. Next, we slightly increased the maximum size for an ADU and adjusted the dimensional standards to be consistent, and modified the definition of what the square footage calculation for an ADU is. We added incentives based on landscaping, construction materials, and the unit affordability. And we've modified the ownership requirement to allow for a minimum rental term of 90 days for seasonal workers and renters without limiting the ADUs to short-term rentals. We have gotten a lot of public feedback on this, and it's important to note that we will be addressing this as part of the affordable housing code update as well. And moving on, at the prior planning commission meeting, we had a 2 minor updates that had to occur. The first one being a minor clarification in the general provisions. The last sentence there, we changed it to say that a unit may not be occupied as an ADU. Prior it said units, and just to make it clear that we're in the ADU section and we're only talking about ADUs, we changed that. The next thing we made sure we got right this time was that the minimum lot size that an ADU could be on was 3,000 square feet. Making sure that we got that. And, as part this was publicly posted and notified in conformance with section 7-1-5 of the RMC. We received 1 public comment. As part of this ordinance 03 or 2024-03, these are the text amendment options for planning commission to consider. Planning commission may recommend approval of the proposed updates upon finding that the following criteria set forth in the RMC have been satisfied. I'll quickly go through these. That the text amendment is consistent with the intent of the applicable portions of the master plan and reasonable adjustment in the body, and that the proposed text amendment is necessary to correct an omission or error in the code, or the proposed text amendment is necessary to adapt to a change in conditions within the town, where changes in public policy are needed to advance the general welfare of the town. Planning commission may approve with conditions, deny, or continue the proposed text amendment. So the staff recommendation. Staff recommends the planning commission recommend approval of ordinance number 03-2024, an ordinance of the town of Ridgway, Colorado, amending section 7-4 zoning regulations of the Ridgway Municipal Code regarding accessory dwelling units. The actual motion is before you. And the next slide includes alternative motions, one where you can approve the text with conditions, and one where you can deny the text amendment, and of course, as an alternative, you can also continue.
Thank you. Do the commissioners have any questions with what, for what was presented?
Just one, when we had talked about environmental incentives, we didn't quantify those. We had talked about it, you know, like if the more somebody met, the more they would be allowed, we would discuss allowing them more square footage or whatever. Do you know what happened to that conversation?
I think and you're referring to,
I had shared a bunch of building standards.
right, yeah, and so what we talked about is just the standards that they could be built to.
Yeah.
Right, and that there is no one size fits all or one standard approach. And that the way, and I apologize if we never followed up specifically and had a conversation, now I'm recalling it, we talked about it. But that the way that it's drafted is to allow any of those.
Okay.
For the applicant to provide justification for how they're meeting that.
Okay.
And it's where we were going with that originally was twofold, right? Not requiring LEED because that adds a whole bunch of costs, right? And that kind of concept, the same with like dark skies and other ones like that. So we're allowing the flexibility in that to then be interpreted in that.
Okay.
And then it was gonna be a staff.
Yeah.
Decision.
Yeah, and just giving an applicant a guidance tool.
Correct.
It's like, well,
Correct.
here's some things, because well, gee, that's nice. How do I do this?
Yeah,
And-
and so those are the tools that we would provide
Okay,
at the application time when we're talking, I guess I should be a little bit, they're not here
yeah,
anymore. Right, so now we have more tools, so thank you for that,
okay,
to show here's how you can do that.
okay, thank you. That was it.
Jack, do you have anything? I just opened it up for comments from the public. I don't know how to bring up
Yeah.
that issue.
Yeah,
Alright.
just open up that public comments.
I'm gonna open public comments. If anyone in the public would like to address this specific topic, please step up to the microphone. Name, address, and your concern. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We'll go ahead with people that are here in person first.
Beth Lakin, 267 Murray Street. I understand that it sounds like we're going to address owner occupancy and affordable housing. However, our occupancy issue is as simple as striking that provision from this code update. I wrote you all a letter that I noted wasn't in the staff report, but now it looks like it was maybe in the presentation. I really do want to consider that ADUs are a potential affordable housing option for professionals who work in the community. They're the size that they hit a price point where someone can live alone and not have to seek roommates. I also noted that restricting potential rental of 2 units may put some residents at a disadvantage in building an ADU. This whole code update was designed to encourage building of ADUs, but for those folks without 2 incomes, or those who might face a loss of income or face a change in family status, for good or bad, who need to leave to care for a family member, the inability to rent their primary dwelling unit in addition to the ADU may mean that they have to sell their home in Ridgway. Or they won't build any based on that uncertainty. I did note that we did approve a change to someone who purchased an affordable housing unit and granted them the ability to rent it. So we do recognize the need for flexibility for Ridgway residents. And right now, this is creating a situation where we don't want a homeowner to create an affordable housing unit for fear they may not be able to cover their costs. And then the other part is that we can't actually enforce this in any way. We currently have situations where both an ADU and a primary dwelling unit are rented. Both units are occupied by people who live and work in our community. They are happy with their housing. And they would be very loath to hear the town had asked their landlord to evict one or the other of the tenants. However, that places those of us who can't build an ADU because we can't rent both units at an economic disadvantage because we are choosing to follow the rules. There is no mechanism for enforcing long-term rentals in the same way we can look on an Airbnb or a VRBO to enforce short-term rentals. Many of our rentals get rented through the community network, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But that means we can't enforce them in those ways. So therefore, you're creating disincentives to follow code. And for some folks who feel obligated to, that's a problem. And finally, this doesn't actually prevent those concerns around outside investment. Outside investors will come in and purchase property and sit out in Ridgway because they will make money. They will make their money when they sell. They will make more than a couple $100s a month just growing their equity. So I would encourage us to think about trying to come up with codes that actively address the concerns in a way that don't create collateral damage like this would. Good policy addresses issues directly. We got rid of the need for 20 by 24 rectangle in design standards a few years ago because that was indirectly approaching things around manufactured homes. This is doing the same thing and harming folks who just want to provide good quality affordable housing in Ridgway. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
May I? Because,
Just to be clear, we're gonna go with the people who are here in person and then we'll move to the people that are on Zoom. So yeah, go ahead, you're good.
Hello, my name is Kevin O'Hara, 277 South Charlotte Street here in town. Excuse me, I've been resident for 25 years. And I have an ADU. The one thing I just want to bring up is there is a publication by AARP. I'm sure you're familiar with who they are, which are set forth guidelines for accessory dwelling units in communities that are consistent with their values and necessity of people. I can give you that website if you'd like to find that, but one of the things that they list is owner occupancy requirements of how it's not shown to be an effective way of controlling rent. It harms the homeowners more than it helps the community. And you can read this. I printed out this if anybody wants to just read these. But there's several guidelines that say that that is just not a good thing for people. And so my situation right now, currently, I have an ADU. I built it in 2007 after buying my house in 2003. You know, when I built it, it was my plan to retire here or use it as an investment for my retirement. And so that's what I did. I built it and I live in the ADU because it's a much nicer 1-bedroom house. And I rent out the 2-bedroom, or actually it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath modular house in the front. And I've had happy renters and long-term renters, and everything works out fine. Well, I'm 69 years old. I almost became a cripple this last winter. So I want to retire, sell my house, but I can't sell my house to the prospective buyers that want it because they want to have 2 rentals, which is what my property is perfectly made for. You know, a rental property, not, you know, a manufactured home, not a beautiful house that anybody'd want to, you know, spend their life in. And although it is well enough to do that, you want to rent it. But, and then the ADU is, you know, it's small, it's 1-person thing. And so, you know, I have a client that was interested in buying it, but, you know, they heard that, you know, the town had an ordinance that you can do it, then, you know, they canceled the deal. So now I'm restricted of trying to find somebody out there that will qualify for that. Whereas, you know, right now, I'm not even renting my house because I'm trying to sell it. And so, you know, to make it a better offer to somebody who wants it. So I'm denying people rent right now. And somebody wants to buy it and have 2 rentals, you know, which would be just perfect, you know, it's better than 1. It just doesn't make sense for a lot of people. It certainly doesn't make sense for me. And, you know, it's like, even right now, you know, that, I'm done with winter in Ridgway. I'm done with the snow. And in the winter, I want to go to travel and go to Mexico or somewhere and spend the winter down there away from it. And so I can rent out my house, which I'm apparently not allowed to do, but it provides somebody 6 months rental, whether they work Telluride on the ski slopes or just need a place for 6 months that works out for everybody. So I think that, you know, having these provisions in there is, you know, it might sound like a good idea for the town, but it affects different people in different ways. And we're a small town and we don't have that many properties, that many ADUs, and I don't see how, you know, trying to make these regulations of who can rent and who can't isn't productive. So thank you for your time, appreciate it.
Thank you. Your name, just for clarity, we didn't make this ordinance. We didn't add this. This was already there. Does anyone know the history of it?
I think
Where it was made?
what we should do is stick to the process for public hearing, which is take all the comments and then discuss. If we don't want back and forth. Typically in public hearing, you
Okay,
discuss
thank
up here, you have public comment.
Got
and then you close public comment.
I'm just curious, where are your buyers, your potential buyers,
that
where are they
acceptable?
from?
well then,
It was through a broker out of Telluride. I'm not sure where they know, they could be Telluride.
I was just curious. if
Yeah, I'm not sure.
They
their
were
home
here.
address, yeah. But their intention was, I'm not sure why they wanted, but investment. You know, they had money to invest, they want to invest it in real estate. I have 2 beautiful rentals ready to go that somebody could buy, and 2 happy families would be more than pleased. And may I ask, when was the ordinance? Passed?
Originally?
The original?
Oh, 10, 15 years ago, at least.
Well,
Right, 12.
I mean, before.
We need to.
2006.
We're
Let's
doing
stop
back and
and
forth.
we're
like you
gonna-
can't do.
I just
We're gonna
want to know if it was before, after.
we're gonna have that conversation because I also had that question, so we'll
Okay,
get there.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much for your time, appreciate it.
Jim?
Okay. Oh, you need that still.
So I think it was in 2011.
Okay.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
I've been whining to town council about a town planner who lives in town for long enough. I figured I should be here to welcome you. So I'm glad.
Where
you're
did
here.
Tom go?
Gives hearing aids. For God's sake. So glad you're here, and I really look forward to you being able to not only work on the big projects, but also the little things in town. And be involved in anything that is gonna make our town look different, or and it's gonna affect us over the long haul, so. I'm super excited to have you. I personally am in favor of having the ADUs being one of them owner occupied. I think I built the second one in 2012. You know.
Just to be clear, you built an ADU in 2012.
Correct, yeah, second ADU in town. And I was in favor of it, and I thought it was great that the town offered a number of incentives. As in waiving the tap fee if you tie into your sewer and the water in the main house. It was a great incentive. I thought it was just a great deal, and it turned out I had the money, I was able to do it. But from my standpoint, the collateral damage kind of goes the other direction. I live over by the hardware store, up Hyde Street, halfway on the left-hand side. I've been there 26 years. And for example, we have renters next door. We've had good renters and we have bad renters. And the collateral damage about not having an owner occupying one of the two spaces, whether the ADU or the house, potentially allows things, in my opinion, to potentially get out of hand. At least there's somebody to manage it. For example, next door, we've had some crazy things. There used to be a trailer on the corner, catty corner from the hardware store. Those people decided to have a party on the top of their house at 4 o'clock in the morning. Their owner lives in Maui. Her name's Roberta. A little tough to have her manage those people. My point being, when there's someone renting and an owner is occupying one of the two spaces, they can manage that. Otherwise, it's up to the neighbors to deal with it, or to get the police to come in the middle of the night. Had a corner from our house also in the condos across from the hardware store. There was a unit rented by a couple of cooks, and they worked at night, and they drank all during the day, and they accosted Monroe's young girls, 12 and like 11 years old. And we had to contact that person, lives in Arizona. So the opportunity for people to buy 2 rental units and be able to rent both of them and be wherever minimizes the management of those units and creates collateral damage for the neighbors. And that's my biggest concern around this. So I'm in favor. I was in favor of it, and I thought it was smart from the get-go. And I still feel like that's really the right thing to do. So that's where I stand. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. It looks like that's it on the public here in person, so let's move to Zoom.
Okay.
Jake, would you like to go?
Yeah, there we are. Hi, Jake Neese, Ridgway resident, also a housing advocate. I'm on the board of the Home Trust of Erie County, and also am the county commissioner. And I commented last planning commission meeting about this topic, and my comments here are largely going to be the same. I think it would make sense to strike that 4A, requiring one of the units to be owner occupied. I definitely hear the concerns about investors buying homes to rent, but they want to rent short-term rentals. And believe me, I get yelled at a lot from people who want more short-term rentals. They're not knocking down the door to long-term rent. That's definitely a suggestion I make every time people want more short-term rentals, is I suggest that they should consider renting it long-term to someone who lives here. But I think that even if investors were buying houses to rent them, that would not be a problem. And in fact, I think it would be good. We need more rentals in the free market that aren't income limited to serve that missing middle. I talked about that a little bit before, that's roughly in the range of an income of $80,000 to $250,000. When we do all the income restricted affordable housing, we're looking at lower incomes. And a lot of the people who are working professional jobs, and even our teachers, often are just above those low income thresholds. So we really do need more rentals in the free market there that can serve that missing middle. And I would have to argue with the claim that renters are loud and irresponsible. I don't think it's fair to profile renters that way. And I don't think that those examples listed were ADUs. People can still rent out a main unit and potentially have that problem, or people who own houses can still have that problem as well. So I just think that if we want to get at one of the many causes of the affordable housing crisis, striking that 4A that requires owner occupancy of one of the units would be a tool to do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jake. I believe someone else had their hand up. I can't.
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yeah, can you state your name and your address? We just can't read your name from the screen.
Sure. This is Sheldon Kerr. I live on South Laura Street. And I also have an ADU. I don't know who is running the Zoom, but I think that muting some of the other folks that are waiting to talk might help the sound work a little better.
Yeah, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself.
A couple things that I wanted to mention. I think that what Beth had to say makes a lot of sense to me. And I also see this provision of making sure that one of the buildings is owner occupied being a hindrance or having more affordable housing here. To Jim's point about wanting to preserve the neighborhood quality or community quality, I think there's a fairly straightforward solution in that about having agents in town able to work on behalf of the owner to make sure that renters are complying with our municipal codes as far as noise ordinances and such. And I think that makes more sense to me as a solution than the possibility of having a house sitting there without folks able to rent it. I'm just reading through this document that Mr. Garcia has written here and presented. It just looks like it lacks the teeth that some of the initial conversations we were having in the Planning Commission had, that there are a couple things in here that may incentivize ADUs a bit, but I don't see it being much of it seems to be just a little bit of a step in the right direction rather than something substantive. And I'd like to see something more substantive coming up. Thanks.
Thanks, Sheldon.
Is there anyone else on Zoom waiting to speak? Anyone in the audience? I will now close public comment. And I would like to address the question that I had with Preston or TJ, which is the history of this ordinance. It didn't originate with the Planning Commission. This Planning Commission during this iteration of the code.
Yeah, and what we're talking about, just to be clear and specific, is the provision that requires one of the units to be owner occupied.
Yeah, and I know you might not have that information, but if you do, I'd be interested.
I was actually just gonna, on there trying to find it right now, but I don't have the actual information, but I am looking at the code that's in there now. That
It was already in place.
It's already in place.
Yeah.
It is not something that I think was changed in the last code update, which was 2019.
Mhm.
So it's in there from the start. Yeah.
And that's all. I know that
Yeah.
doesn't change people's stance on anything, but I just wanted to be clear that that's not something that we just came up with. It's something we discussed at length and looked at the pros and cons and decided to leave it where it was. Does anybody on the Planning Commission want to speak to that?
I will comment and say, apologies first off, because I missed the last meeting where this was discussed at length. But I guess I'm more willing to consider not having the owner occupied requirement. It's just so long as they can't, as neither unit can be short-term rented. And while I appreciate your comments, Jim, my feeling is like what Sheldon said. Misbehaving renters, put it that way, can happen in any rental unit anywhere in town, whether they're in an ADU or not. And there are plenty of rental units around town where the landlord is an absentee landlord, and that issue exists, that potential issue exists all the time. So, and I think enforcement by complaint, unfortunately, is the way most things happen around town, around that kind of thing, and it's gonna have to happen regardless. So, I mean, I do agree with a number of the comments of how important it is that we get as much rental inventory. I mean, to me, it boils down to the fact that we need as much workforce housing as we can possibly create at this point. I see so many things happening around town with the increased property values and the struggles. I just heard within the last week or 10 days that Ridgway Family Dentistry is closing because they can't find employees who could live here. I know of a couple other businesses that have closed recently because they're not doing very well, and not necessarily housing related. But I think the housing issue continues to get worse and worse, even though we've done a number of things to try and address it. And having a good rental inventory, I think, is really important. So I guess I'm just saying I'm willing to consider removing that requirement that one of the units be owner occupied, just so long as that we're not allowing, and I think the way it's written now, we don't allow short-term rentals if it's an ADU at all. Now, the chances are that we may have to change something that says that the primary residence can't be short-term rented if it's on a property with an ADU and the primary residence isn't owner occupied.
Where both units are
guess.
rented, that neither can be a short-term rental, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm interested in hearing from other commissioners because this was pretty adamant, so I just want to.
And if I'm like the lone voice, I get it, but I just think it's worth considering.
I'm kind of middle of the road.
I kind of had the same feeling on the side. We need the rental space. I can see the justification of having two rentals on a property. I think bad renters are manageable and an issue, but it's not relative to ADUs or primary houses either one. To me, the other concern would just be that it's not that you actually do get that benefit of housing, and it's a long-term versus a short-term, because otherwise, if somebody buys it and it's their second vacation, it's their vacation home, that's not doing anything to help promote that. So to me, you would have to have it be a long-term, not a short-term, in order to accommodate and provide the intent of what everybody's pushing for.
Yeah, and then how we accomplish that, I'm not sure. It's also an enforcement issue. I don't know how we enforce that.
Because it's real unfair if it's not enforced.
I think it's enforceable, just like people need a license for a short-term rental and our staff, reviews those listings online.
Right.
So I think that that's more enforceable than what we currently have. Pam, you felt strongly about it.
I'm willing to discuss it. I'm not willing to just let it go and say, open it up to any investor. I want further discussion and some version of guardrails. I've lived in enough ski towns where it turns into an absolute nightmare. And I'm not okay with that. I've seen the damage it can do to a neighborhood. Where landlords just don't care. They're collecting a rent check and they're like, good enough for me. So I'm open to discussion, but I want guardrails.
Do we still have Jack?
Yeah, he's got his hand up. JTP is Jack.
Oh, let's hear from Jack.
Well, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Good. I realize that this would be a financial benefit for Jake and Beth and Kevin, but I think the concern I have is more about the community. If Kevin is to sell his two nice rental units to a fellow from Telluride, and then that fellow in Telluride is able to buy those two units, and then he buys two more units from Beth and two more units from somebody else, and all of a sudden he's got 8 or 10 rentals in Ridgway with ADUs behind him that he doesn't have to live in. So I think one of the unintended consequences of making these owner occupied is you're not going to have multiple purchases from Texas or Telluride or Los Angeles buying rental units and turning them into apartment complexes in the middle of a subdivision. And that's my major concern here. And I think we just doubled the density in the town. We just allowed twice as many ADUs. And I think we've been very generous with this density. I think we should tread softly here. I'm kind of more in favor of what Pam was saying than what John was saying. I'm not opposed to it, but I'm opposed to it tonight. And I think we need to move slowly with this and see how it feels. One or two investors come in and buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these houses, which happens in all ski towns all over the West, will be a disaster for the town and disaster for those communities, whether it be Solar Ranch, River Park, Parkside, Vista Terrace. And once they're in, they're in. So I think we should move slowly with this, and I'm opposed to eliminating the owner occupancy.
Let me just ask you a question. If all we're doing with the concept here is we're allowing somebody to come in and buy 2 rental properties on 1 property, what would it slow down an investor from coming in and doing that on his own anyway, buying a place, putting in an ADU? We've already had the approval there. Has that happened? Have we seen that? That's what I got a question when we start going, whoa. It's like, is it really a problem? Has it happened? We can have a concern, but if it's not happening, we need to think about that.
I think the concern is that if it starts happening, that we don't have anything in place to stop it, right? We certainly
But there's
can't.
been nothing to stop them from doing that today.
Well, they could only.
Yes, there is.
They could only rent 1 of the 2 units,
And
so
let them-
financially, would that be feasible? Right, I think that's what people are looking at. We increase the incentive by allowing both to be rented.
Okay, but at the same time, if somebody really wanted to invest here, they could come and buy a home anyway. And rent that out, and they could have done this 5, 6, 7, 8 times, potentially. Has that happened?
Russ, I think what you're talking about is we're talking about turning a community into an apartment complex. This is why God created apartments. So we're talking about an ADU in somebody's backyard in a neighborhood versus an investor who wants to buy 2, 4, 6, or 8, or 100 units. So I don't want an apartment complex next to my house. The 2 lots on either side of me would allow for 3 ADUs if one was deed restricted. That would devastate our neighborhood. Devastate it.
How would let me get clarity on that. How would having more ADUs in your neighborhood devastate it?
On the lot next to me, it's a 12,000 square foot lot. So it's a 4,000 square foot house. There's enough real estate. There's enough real estate for them to build 2 ADUs plus possibly a 3rd one if it was deed restricted. So I think that's tripling the density next to me. I think, to me, that's devastating. So I don't know if it devastates the neighborhood, but
I think one of the points is that if the person's living there, would they be less likely to build 3 ADUs and rent them all out? Or if it was an investment property and you could rent all 4, I think that's what he's trying to say. If all of those were rentals, that would change the dynamic in the community. I'm not saying I agree. I'm just trying to explain what.
We closed public comment, Beth, so
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry.
let me see if I can explain that better. I think by allowing the possibility of 3 ADUs, we've really stretched the envelope here. And by adding the non-owner occupancy, I think pushes it over the top.
Can I throw out a suggestion that Jennifer made when she emailed Preston and I this afternoon and wanted to give a little feedback? She suggested maybe if we do a motion with a condition that we create a variance process where somebody can ask for a variance to rent out both the ADU and the primary residence if they can prove that they're renting it long-term and that they are, doing it to create affordable housing.
Then we have
I don't know.
that like a standard, because if the absent homeowner comes in for the variance process, how can we be like, no, well, no, not you. You can't do
I
it
mean, it's a good point.
because you don't live. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
just pointing out that.
Just think it's an interesting potential that we could probably.
And that was what we came up with last month, when we talked about this. We're like, we hear your concerns, we understand what you're trying to accomplish, but we also have this other concern, so let's come back with creative solutions that might solve both problems, and I've yet to hear any of those. It's just the same argument. TJ?
If I may on that, because we did go back and kind of consider those and what could. And I think frankly, really it comes down to subjectivity. Right? You can't put objective standards on owner, right? And so we really did not want to set the town up for that level of failure either. We did, we knew on it quite a bit, and frankly, don't know that there's a solid answer on that regard as far as setting up a process to review whether or not something should or could be waived related to owner occupancy. If I may also just go back and just point out, so to Russ's comment of not necessarily seeing it, I don't know. But I just wanted to point out that right now, the rule is in place right now that requires owner occupancy. Sure. Which may dissuade some of those from even coming forward.
Yeah, to me, that it's a little bump to get that extra ADU, sure. But at the same time, I think if somebody really wanted to make Ridgway an investment location for themselves, they would have come in here and they would have bought as many houses as they wanted.
I don't disagree with that at all.
So, you know.
But
aside from whether or not they have an ADU.
Correct. And I mean, with the current regulations we have, they couldn't. But they still could have come in and bought 5, 10 houses if they wanted to. And that's where I was questioning, has that happened?
Do you feel like that would, like, right now, there's not that many houses for sale, like the thing that Jack said can't happen because they're not available. Do you feel like allowing both units to be rented increases the value of the property? The for sale value? Yeah, I'll ask you.
That's kind of a realtor question.
yeah, I mean, I don't know that I want to speculate on that.
What I'm
probably
getting at was, would it
if-
encourage someone to sell? You know?
I couldn't tell you. I'll say,
Michelle, since I'm in the real estate business, I'll comment on that. There's no question it raised the value. No question.
one of the things to, if I may just reiterate that the policy decision that we've been operating under is that an ADU is a means to keep somebody in their current home and make that home more affordable for the current property, the homeowner, not necessarily add units to the market. And that's the point where we were saying, and we might have gone over it a little bit quickly, but the point being that the way to get meaningful market units to the market, the approach that we've been taking is that there are other means to do that. ADUs is not solving that problem. Now, that is a objective. That can be disputed or debated, right? But that is the premise that we've been operating under. Taking on the ADUs, which I think is very important, that we're not saying no to units.
Right.
We're just saying that this is the point, this is how we're looking at ADUs.
And it's a good point that's, I know for a fact that that's where the original ADU ordinance came from. It's a way to say, hey, individual property owners that might struggle to stay in their home based on mortgage rates and all that, giving them an opportunity to build an ADU on top of their garage or whatever, makes it possible for them to more safely stay. It wasn't to create.
One, a lot of places where they weren't allowed, people just do it, you know, not necessarily Ridgway, people do it anyway, because that's the only way they can afford to keep their home. So we've given a legal way to do that. And for the record, I'm not for or against this. I see both issues, and I don't think that one is more important than the other. I think they're equally important, and so I'm waiting for something we can come up with. I don't know that it exists,
So
where we can address both things.
if someone wanted to build a duplex, they're not required to live in one of the units. No.
Correct.
So if they wanted to invest in the town in a rental property, they could do that.
But what if I already built a house and I want to invest more?
Sorry, Beth.
Guys.
Okay, thank you. To me, I'm comfortable with approving what we have and then continuing the discussion on this topic.
I don't think it works that way.
We don't have to,
We can,
that question is not in this ordinance. The owner occupied.
It is.
So right now, as presented, which
It's in there.
we're recommending,
Right.
if you will, which we're asking the planning commission to make a recommendation to town council.
To approve
Would
this
be-
as it stands.
Without-
Inclusive of the owner occupancy in one of the units
Correct.
for an ADUs.
And I'm
that is-
willing-
that is-
Could I add another thought?
No,
I'm sorry, Sheldon, this is a public hearing and we open it up for public comment. When we close it, there's no more public comment. Unless the chair chooses to reopen public comment, we can't take any more public comment. I'm sorry. I mean, you can choose to reopen it and take. your
I'd
time.
like to finish having the conversation we're having.
Okay, that's
Okay,
fine.
so the current, we're not, this ordinance, we changed densities, size, configurations. We didn't change, we are not changing owner occupancy.
From the current requirements, that is correct.
So I'm comfortable voting on the current decision.
Okay, but we'd be recommending it for town council to approval, so it doesn't leave it
I think you're
open.
misunderstanding what she's saying. Michelle, she's saying we'll approve it, we'll send it to council, and then we can have further discussion about whether we want to tweak it a little further and send it back to council. with
I want to discuss that. I want to keep that discussion separate from this vote.
Okay, but once we send it to council, they may not want additional input. They're gonna vote on it, or they're
That's
gonna
fine.
decide.
You're just misunderstanding that.
I don't think I am.
If they go ahead and.
You're always change an ordinance.
ordinance.
You can always come back and amend an ordinance. That's all she's saying.
We don't,
We
this,
can come back and look at it.
yeah,
Basically, what it is
This is a
is-
standalone issue.
It's gonna
Correct.
take the existing modifications that we've done to it, approve those. And that other one will still be an issue that we can continue to kick the dead horse down the road.
And I don't wanna kick it
It's an
down.
active issue, so, and I understand both sides. I think people who have to, be able to rent them. I understand the other side, but not as much, so I'm struggling with that, but. Yeah, so we can continue to discuss that. The point now is, do we want to go ahead and approve as is with the other modifications?
It sounds like it's
Back and look at this owner occupancy.
I want
issue.
to keep that discussion going.
Yeah.
But we're not going to decide on, I don't want to decide on it tonight because I don't think we're there yet.
I understand that, but it goes to the bottom, it doesn't stay at the top. We move on to discussing other things as far as I can tell. I don't think we recommend approval to council and then say, oh, but we'll get back to you on this other piece that we're gonna talk about in 6 months to a year. Like it loses its importance.
I don't,
Michelle, we could make a motion that we revisit this in a year from now. We can make any motion we want. I know that we have motions that are recommended to us, but we can craft any motion we want.
and I don't see it going off the table. I think
Okay.
it's a huge issue,
Okay,
but I don't think we're ready to, we're still very mixed in our viewpoints.
how many people would be in favor of dropping it with the rule that it would, that both units would have to be long-term rented? Was
When you say-
what you suggested?
Yeah,
You would be.
I'm probably the only one.
You would as well,
oh, okay.
and Pam and Jack would not,
Not yet.
and we're missing 2 people.
So
And that's not, that motion is not in this, unless you want to make an amendment to the
Got
motion.
it.
which
That's not,
We can make any motion we want.
it might, depending on how complicated it gets, it might require staff going back and taking another stab at it, but.
So TJ, what do you think the importance is of sending this on for approval to council as is, or delaying it for a month and further discussing it? I mean, I don't know that we're gonna have new information is the problem.
That's my opinion, and I'm
You're formulating
to
it?
not share it. I think there's, so, first, I mean, we can do whatever the commission is wanting to do. A couple of things that are coming to my brain as we're talking through this is, one, a lot of good work moving in a direction has occurred in this ordinance, I think. So the concept of not getting rid of what we've already done and kind of moving that forward to address a lot of things may hold a lot of water, right? The concept that this provision that's in question, we are not changing from current code. whether you like it or not, I understand the sentiment, but we haven't really addressed it because it's a new, it's a nut that we just haven't been able to crack. And we could kick that to another day.
But it could get changed at the town council level without our input.
Correct, yep.
With no.
The other related to, where's that threshold, and I've kind of thought about this, that if you all came out tonight and said, hey, we just want to change voter occupancy to either strike the whole thing or just change that provision, that would be doable. Anything related to evaluating it or setting up a process, I would be nervous about moving forward with any recommendation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at from a staff standpoint, on those elements.
Okay, and I want to just hear if Angie wants to speak to it. I'm sorry, I didn't ask you first. We're just used to having TJ and not used to having you, but if you have anything to say about this,
Preston.
we'd be happy to hear.
In your experience, how have you managed this or suggested this before, recommended?
If it's a longer discussion.
Want a
then-
microphone?
No,
Can hear.
this is picking me up.
And you can say, you know what, I don't want to weigh in. It's totally,
No, if it's a longer discussion that needs to happen, you can continue the item and address it at the next meeting. That's always an option. I don't know. I don't know everything that you've talked about up to date, but, yeah,
thanks.
that's an option.
How about you? You got anything?
He's been waiting.
My name is Preston Neal, Town Manager for Ridgway. Talking from staff perspective, so I'm not technically a member of the public, just to make it clear what I am. It's y'all's prerogative to kick this down the road. I don't know that I would recommend that. I think y'all will be having a very similar philosophical conversation next month or 2 months from now. Thinking out loud, we could do our best to collect some information from other communities about whether they have similar provisions in place. I'm looking at TJ, did we do something like that already, or Max actually? I think Max may have already provided some information to that effect, but we can look at it in a more robust way, if that's helpful. We could survey the community. Might take some time. Not sure how we might conduct that. I'm just trying to be helpful to help inform your decision just on that one piece in this, or that one provision in this whole section. So it rests with you all at this point on how to move forward.
Okay, I am not kicking the can down the road. Want to make that really crystal clear. It's just such an important issue that I think we need to do more homework. It comes up and it's part of a larger, it's part of another conversation. We've never done a work session on more homework, research, what kind of guardrails are available to us, what's legal, what's not. It's always come up, but we've never dove in to, as you said, crack the nut and make it the topic. So I'm not pushing it down the road.
So what I'm hearing is that we probably need to vote on this and move it forward to council. I don't think we're going to, I don't think there's a whole bunch of information that we haven't considered or that's suddenly going to come to light where we can solve both issues with one thing. But I want everyone on the commission to be very clear is when this goes to town council, they can very well strike that and move forward. And that's the end of it. And we can
Michelle,
discuss.
Michelle, I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay,
I'll make a motion that we recommend to town council that they approve this ordinance as submitted with the condition that the planning commission relooks at this in a year from now, or when staff finds new information about the owner occupancy provision.
okay, before we have a second, are we, TJ, do you feel like we're good with that motion? That's workable? Or whoever I'm at, or Angie or Preston, are we okay with that motion? All right,
Am I allowed to ask a question?
No,
We need
it
a
dies for
second.
lack of a second, or, I mean,
Okay,
first thing needs to happen is the motion get seconded or not.
Okay.
Not all second.
thank you.
Now we can.
Now you can ask a question.
I don't think we have to specify a year. I would like to do it sooner. I don't want the public to think that we've kicked it down the road.
But I think his motion actually said that if staff comes up with something more enlightening for us, if they can bring it forward before a year. A year is just kind of we'll set a reminder out there. If something comes up before then, his motion covered that, staff can bring it forward and discuss it. Is that right, Jack?
Yeah.
That's my intention. That was my intention. I mean, I'm not kicking it down the road. I just don't think we have enough information tonight. So I want to approve this. I want to recommend it to council, and I want to keep the door open for future information.
Okay.
Is there a way to convey, I mean, I guess we have to show up at the council meeting. Is there a way to convey to council that we have considered this and, you know, where that this is we've discussed it at length?
I would imagine that staff would cover that and present it to council.
And we've got 2 council members on the planning commission.
We can
Okay,
show up at the meeting and speak as public, Michelle.
Right,
I was just gonna
right.
say, you can do any and all. You can show up at the meeting, you can write a letter trying to stress to council that how important you feel that it is that we really work this issue over, whatever, I mean, anything is possible along those lines.
Are there any, is there any other discussion or questions on the motion? We're ready for a roll call vote.
All right. Commissioner Poyster,
Yes, aye.
Petroselli,
Aye.
Mayor Clark,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
Aye.
and Chairperson Montague.
Aye.
Good job, you two. A lot of good stuff in there. Still need to work financially.
So there's a work in progress.
And that's the way,
Documents.
and that's the way I see it. It's just a really, really difficult topic.
No, it's not-
Yeah, and I didn't feel comfortable throwing away all the concerns we expressed because we need housing, you know. Anyway, that's all I have on that.
Thanks, Commissioner, for your support.
Next, parking, hot topic, parking. You're leaving, Jim? You're gonna miss this one.
I'm in favor of the new plan.
Next, ordinance number 04-2024, amending section 7-4 zoning regulations of the Ridgway Municipal Code relating to parking standards, and I believe this is Max again.
Yes, parking standards, ordinance 2024-4. I would like to make a quick note about the staff report. The staff recommendations has the incorrect ordinance number. It says 03 instead of 04. So they'll be correct up here, but the motions, if you need to read them, I'll be correct with you instead. So I will, as I did with ADUs, go through a quick summary of the staff report, and then go from there, addressing any questions from the commission. As part of the same January 30th meeting, the planning commission, we kicked off multiple code updates, one of those being parking standards. Ridgway identified that to improve the transportation infrastructure, related more specifically to site development, that the parking standards need to be updated. And the primary objective here is to evaluate the current language, overall reduce the requirements for parking and recommend code changes based off some of the best practices and a parking assessment that was completed in 2018 with the town of Ridgway as well. So I'll go through a summarized version of the code update and changes we have recommended. Overall, we've reduced and simplified the parking requirements in the use table. Numerous uses have been removed and changed to be more simply understood. We added staffing requirements for a few uses to make circulation on site smoother. We've introduced 2 new sections, one on EV ready parking and one on shared parking plans to provide additional flexibility to developers. As well as expanded the existing bicycle parking requirements to really push the multimodal transportation options. You can ignore E, but we also modified those, some of the existing reductions that were present within the parking code. And those are mostly based on the zoning districts and making sure they're consistent with the current parking situation. And finally, at the end there, we added handicap accessible parking standards that are compliant with ADA regulations at the federal level. There was one primary change from the July 30th meeting, and section regarding shared planning provisions. We made a note as part of the pedestrian movement in that shared parking plan, that there's shared parking across one of the highways in town, that the shared parking plan location has to be within 2 blocks of an existing crosswalk or grade separated pedestrian connection before we require it to be a traffic signal, which is sort of feasible from the. That's the only update there. This was properly noticed and posted in accordance with section 715 RMC. That is incorrect. There was not any public comment that has been received on this item. Finally, these are the text amendment options for the parking standards. I'll go through these one more time. The first approval criteria is that the text amendment is consistent with the intent and applicable provisions of the master plan, reasonable judgment, and of the approving body. The proposed text amendment is necessary to correct an omission or error in the code. Proposed text amendment is necessary to change the conditions within the town, or the changes in public policy are needed to advance the general welfare of the town. The planning commission can approve with conditions, deny, or continue this proposed text amendment. The staff recommends, planning commission recommend approval of ordinance number 04-2024. An ordinance of the town of Ridgway, Colorado, amending section 7-4 zoning regulations of the Ridgway municipal code regarding parking standards. The recommended motion is provided below there. And as I noted, this is the correct recommended motion. The staff report does not have the correct ordinance number. But that is all I have for the parking standards. Thank you.
Thanks, Max.
Any comments or questions from the commission? Anybody? Tom, did you want to speak to parking?
No.
And anybody on Zoom? It's not as hot of an item.
Oh, somebody's.
I think it's Jack. Oh, he's just got his hand up perpetually. Angie, do you have anything to say on this?
I don't have anything to add, no.
I think we've talked about it at length and are probably ready for a motion.
I move to recommend approval of ordinance 04-2024, the ordinance of the town of Ridgway, Colorado, amending section 7-4 zoning regulations of the Ridgway municipal code regarding parking standards, finding that the criteria set forth in RMC 743 have been met.
I second.
Roll call vote, please.
Okay. Commissioner Foister,
Aye.
Petroselli,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Meyer,
All right.
and Chairperson Montague.
Aye. Moving right along. We're going to go into general business now. Number 4, presentation and discussion regarding analysis related to the economic implications of Ridgway's land use mix. And I believe this is Elliot's chance to speak.
That's me. Thank you, commissioners, for having me. I know I'm a new face here, but I've been working with TJ for some time. And back in spring, he briefed me on some of these issues that you've been weighing related to prospects for future growth in Ridgway, and specifically with regard to individual zoning or rezoning requests. And so I had submitted a couple of written memos to you previously. The most recent one that was included in your staff packet or your, commission packet, sort of rolled up all of the work that's been done to date And we may or may not be done with that work, depending on how well what we've done satisfies what you're looking to get out of this. So I thought for a first slide here in my portion of the presentation, I'd just give an overview of what the purpose of this work was. And as I understand it, one of the primary purposes was to, and I think Max is going to start sharing again, achieve a better understanding of how Ridgway is likely to grow. And of course, nobody knows the future, but we can look at what data are available and try to analyze it to gain a better understanding, an elevated understanding of what some of the market forces are and how those are shaping Ridgway's growth trajectory. A secondary purpose was to ensure that Ridgway has sufficient land to accommodate the desired forms of growth. So the market forces pushing you in one direction or the other are only one factor. How the town wants to grow is another very, very important factor. And ultimately, you've got to square those factors and make land use decisions accordingly. I will just say that data are not perfect on these issues. They are limited in their geographic scope. We have to make inferences from the data. We have to make assumptions. And so part of what was in the most recent memo that I submitted to you was some scenario planning, just saying, what if this happened? Maybe it's not in the forecast data, but if we think that you're actually going to grow faster or get this type of growth, what would that mean for land use planning more broadly? So quickly, a summary of the available forecasts. At the state level, the Department of Local Affairs, or DOLA, projects a slower rate of growth for Ridgway County compared to the way the county has grown over the last 3, 4, 5 decades. So for population, their data goes back to 1980. For employment or the number of jobs, their data goes back to 1990. In both cases, the county over those few decades grew at average annual rates of about 3%, which is quite high. The forecast shows that for both jobs and population, DOLA expects the county to grow at rates closer to 1%, but for population even lower than that.
Do you think that's realistic?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
We don't either.
So I'm very much getting there, yeah. Those forecasts would imply about 200 new residents and 230 new jobs for Ridgway specifically through 2050. That's just saying, because DOLA does not give a forecast for the town specifically, only for the county. If Ridgway grew at the same rate that the county did, that's how many people you'd be looking at coming to town. That's how many jobs would be locating in town. If that were the case, you do have sufficient vacant land right now, according to parcel data from the county assessor, to accommodate that growth. But previous feedback from you as a commission suggested some skepticism about the projected rate of growth from DOLA. And as a result, we thought about a few ways we could follow up to get a better understanding of whether or not those forecasts are reliable, I'll say. So one of the things that we did was reached out to stakeholders. And by stakeholders in this case, I mean folks with direct knowledge of the Ridgway County and broader Western Slope real estate market to try to say, here's what we're seeing on the ground, here's what my buyers are saying, here's what I think is going to happen based on the market interest that we're seeing. And that's for both residential and commercial land. And when I say commercial in this case, I'm talking very broad, not just retail, but really all types of employment generating uses. So that would include industrial and things like that. According to the folks that we interviewed, and we always tell them we'll keep their names out of it, we pledge that we'll keep them anonymous so that they can be as honest as possible with us. But we did talk to 3 different brokers that are active on the Western Slope, a couple of which are here in town. And they suggested that they think the forecasts are low, that strong demand exists currently and should persist into the future for both residential and commercial uses, and specific uses that were called out in those interviews included townhomes, multifamily residential, tourism-related commercial services, hotels or other hospitality-related uses, and industry and manufacturing. And notably for industry and manufacturing, because I did include the table in the memo, but I do not have the table here in the presentation, the town only has about 12 acres of industrial land, none of which, according to the parcel data, are vacant. So it's a very low supply of land with high utilization currently. And another factor to consider here is the town's fiscal health, because different uses do contribute differently to the town's balance sheet. For instance, all uses pay property taxes, but residential uses, of course, don't generate any sales tax revenue. They don't generate hotel motel tax revenue. And sales tax is one of the biggest contributors, if not the biggest contributor to the town's revenues. And so the sort of fiscal footprint, if you will, of commercial uses in Ridgway is larger than the fiscal footprint of residential uses. And so in thinking about what growth should look like for the town, what the town supports, just keeping in mind that while sales tax revenues do vary with economic cycles and can be rather volatile, they are an important part of the town's annual budget. So finally, when it comes to the question of land use balance, which is kind of where the rubber meets the road for this conversation, it does start with the town's vision for the future. Again, you can respond in any way you would like to some of these market forces that are acting on Ridgway, and you can zone accordingly. You can develop regulations that preclude certain uses or limit certain uses or allow ample opportunity for other uses that have community support. And so I don't want to lose that aspect of vision and aspiration for the town in this conversation that is otherwise pretty heavy on data. But we did look at different scenarios for higher growth than forecasted by DOLA, just based on that feedback that we got. And even growth scenarios with 20% higher growth were reasonably well aligned with land availability. So in a scenario where you grew at a 20% higher clip than the DOLA forecast suggests, but made no other land use modifications, no other changes to your development regulations, you would have a slight shortfall in capacity, about 10 to 15 acres of vacant land. But again, you've already made decisions tonight that allow for higher densities. Your decision on the ADU issue allows you to achieve higher residential densities than have historically been present in the town. And so when we made some modifications in the analysis to assume higher densities of development over the next 25 years than have been in the past 30 or 40 years, all of a sudden you're back to a surplus of vacant land. And I know that it may not always feel that way. It's easy to walk by the same lot over and over and not think of it as vacant necessarily. But that's what the data from the assessors say, that you would have enough land to accommodate even that more aggressive growth scenario. There are other scenarios in the memo.
Maybe clarify something there. Let me know if I'm wrong. Yeah. The number that you're using for vacant property though is only zoned for future development?
That's correct. So what we did was we looked at all land.
So it's either more limited, if you will. Right?
Because of the amount of property that's empty, is that what you're saying?
Correct, because there's other vacant properties that are currently zoned that were not in the numbers that he's using as the quick analysis. Right.
Yeah, so we had to make some simplifying assumptions. And I want to stay true to the data here and be as clear as I can without making it more complicated than it needs to be. But you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, no, that's the wrong table. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it would have been the same number anyway. Of zoning designations, and they are light industrial, general industrial, historic business, historic residential, mixed residential, general commercial, future development, and residential. The assessor will tell you for every parcel in town what the zoning designation is and whether or not there's any structure on it. They do that by assigning a value to that structure. So if the value is 0, then you can assume that the parcel itself is vacant. And so what I did to look at development capacity was limit this to only land zoned for future development, and then take all the parcels that the assessor said had 0 built value. If we thought that, okay, we've got a residential zoning designation, a general commercial zoning designation, historic residential, mixed residential, historic commercial, and there are a few vacant parcels here and there on all of those too, that would only add to your capacity. And so that capacity would be greater than what I had shown you in the scenarios amendment.
One I know of a lot over on Lena that's got residents on the back of it, but the front is zone commercial and it's open, right? So that's not counted, but that would potentially, someone will someday build something commercial on the front of that, whether that house on the back stays or not.
That's correct. And oftentimes you can have adjacent parcels that are owned by the same people, so it seems like it may just be a single parcel. You might even know the owner of that land, but in reality, if the assessor shows it as two different parcels, we're going to assume that that's supply of vacant land that could be used down the road. That owner could decide to sell one parcel and keep the other, keep living on it. And that other parcel, because it has no structure on it, is vacant for the commercial operator who buys it.
That's,
I've got a question here.
Go ahead.
Does this study include all the land that's in the urban growth boundary? Even the ones that are unzoned, like for instance, the Wolf's property?
This was limited to land within the town boundary. If you wanted us to look at everything within the growth boundary, we could do so. It would just need a little bit more GIS work to figure out which parcels that includes, and then we could replicate this analysis for those parcels.
I think it should include the urban growth boundary.
well, and there's a bunch of Wolf property that's in the town boundary that's not, I guess it's technically FD because it's not anything else, but.
Right, and so again, just to, I think, clarify that the analysis that uses this 20% growth only looked at a supply that is zoned future development within town limits.
But it says that we're in pretty good shape. So
Yeah, that's
why
what I'm saying.
would doing additional research with more land included get us a different conclusion?
That is exactly the point, that we've done this kind of high level thing.
Yeah.
I didn't do any of it, Elliot did this high level thing and said, hey, at a higher growth rate,
Much
you have
higher.
not plenty, if you have supply,
And what if we didn't?
right?
Especially given that FD could be
Correct.
way different versions of density, right? There is a whole bunch of FD.
Like-
Wolves is the best example, that could be hundreds of units.
Well, I'm saying, Jack, is like, do we really need to do more research on this if it's saying that at this high growth rate, we're fine?
No, I think I didn't realize that the Wolf was zoned FD. I thought Wolf was unzoned. If Wolf was zoned FD, then this is an accurate analysis. I didn't realize that Wolf was zoned FD.
The Wolf property that's within the town boundary is FD, not all.
Yeah, that's about 10 acres. Wolf owns 200 acres within inside the urban growth boundary. So we're dealing with 10 acres versus 180. So the urban growth boundary goes all the way up to County Road 5, and that's going to come into the town. It's going to be annexed into town. It's going to be zoned into town. I don't know what the current zoning is. If it's currently zoned FD, then this analysis is extremely accurate and appropriate. If it's not, there's a big chunk of land that's in our growth boundary that is going to make this analysis even better.
Yeah, well, if I may, because we were charged with just looking and seeing if there's adequate supply to meet that and what those market demands are.
Then your answer is yes.
And the answer right now is generally yes.
And if we have more land that we didn't include, it's even stronger yes.
And, right, and that's all, to your point, Jack, is all covered in the master plan. Which again, the information is there, but I guess being fiscally responsible, I don't know that it's gonna give us anything new in this exercise.
So if you came back and told us, no, we don't have enough, then what we'd be looking at annexing more land into the town, like what's the result of, what do we do with this information? Other than walk away and go, okay, we're good.
Kind of going back again to the very impetus of this conversation and this exercise was applications coming in requesting to rezone property from industrial to residential. And with the concern being, we don't have enough supply to meet the demand. And so what we're seeing now is that at that high level, as Elliot mentioned, from a residential standpoint and a commercial standpoint, we have land to do that. Now, do we have, and this is that next level, yeah.
I was just gonna say, there are some caveats here that I can highlight for you. I'll let TJ finish first, but industrial rezonings in particular would be an area of concern just because your industrial land is so limited. And because the stakeholders all said they have clients who represent industrial uses that would move in tomorrow if the land were built. And obviously that they can't tomorrow, right? It doesn't happen like that, but the demand is certainly there if the town is willing to entertain.
And then the other thing we faced recently with I want to say lot A was wanting to change a bunch of commercial to residential. And we were like, that's probably not a good idea. That plays into the sales tax issue.
Yeah, I would say right now, and really for Preston, your name was on the budget, so. But it looks like the town's finances are in a pretty healthy state.
They are.
So I don't think that there's an issue necessarily. I just think that if you're looking at all of this land that's zoned for future development, it may not be wise to consider it 100% residential. And I say that understanding full well that the town has an affordable housing and just a general housing supply challenge right now of great proportions. I just think that it's important to keep in mind those fiscal contributions, that the town's balance sheet is benefited by having a mix of both residential and commercial.
So
Can I just throw out something real
one
quick?
more question on the same
Yeah, go
thought.
ahead.
So we're going in the right direction on being very thoughtful about changing zoning. And what you're saying is that that's good. When we move into the future development, we don't need to look at all of that as residential. That should also be a mix.
Right, that I think is the big takeaway, that we need industrial, there's a high demand for industrial.
And so we also need to keep in mind that you want to keep the industrial group together. So it's not like industrial is going to be spread all over town. There's limited places where that might show up. Be appropriate, I guess is the right term. Okay, that's all. Go ahead.
Well, Jack, I don't know if you have access to the town, boundary map.
I have it in my head. I don't have it with me right now, but I know it pretty well, John.
You just threw out that Wolf has 10 acres within, Wolf has way more than 10 acres within the existing town boundary. It goes up to County Road 5 and to a line that is even with, what would that be? Like the school property, past the school property. I mean, it looks to me like it's probably 100 acres.
That would have all been included in this report, this analysis.
Because from Auto Street north, it looks like these are 35s. There's a whole ton of Wolf property and then other property, the whole hillside, not that it's buildable, but the whole hillside west of Solar Ranch and Murray Scott. I mean, the town boundary is big. There's a lot of FD around the boundary, the edges of it.
Does the master plan identify ideal places for additional light industrial within that?
Somewhat. There's another map. There's another map that is the 2011. I think unfortunately that's probably the newest.
Because I would say the obvious spot is right where we already have it, and we'll probably be seeing that application sooner than later. One that Jack's very familiar with.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the already approved light industrial. I'm saying in addition to that, in the same place.
John, my question was the stuff that's west of Green Street Park, is that zoned FD? Because that's all in the urban growth boundary. I didn't realize it was also in town.
It's not. It's the big chunk of ground that is south of where Railroad Street turns and goes up Green Street.
Yeah, I mean, they just bought that's 70-acre piece right there that goes up to County Road 5, so you can get an approximate size there. They just bought 72 acres there behind Green Street.
It's like about 70 acres that's directly west of the current industrial area. That's all, I'm guessing, Wolf property, and then all the way down to Charles.
Yes, that's all.
This is all, yeah, anyway, we're picking nits that we don't need to pick.
Right.
Jack, this is Preston. Immediately to the west of Green Street Park, actually, That's outside the town boundary.
It is.
Yes, but it's inside the urban growth boundary.
Yeah,
That was my point.
Growth boundary, I thought you were talking about the current boundary, yes.
But
That's
I,
it.
I agree with what people have been saying. There's really no point in including the urban growth boundary in this analysis, because when you're talking annexation, that's a whole nother ball of wax. And I think we have more than enough information from what's within the actual town boundary. So. Anyway, carry on. Sorry for that.
I'm comfortable.
Yeah, I don't have any other presentation slides, but since we talked about factors that could actually increase your land supply, I will just flag for you a couple factors or assumptions from the analysis that could result in us showing a decrease in the available land. We had to make an assumption around how many housing units are currently vacant that could be occupied before new construction would be forced to kick in. And we did that using data from the Census Bureau in 2022. That's the latest data that they have. They estimate the number of vacant units in town by doing surveys of residents. And because it's based on a survey, there is a margin for error. The estimate in the 2022 data is 86 vacant units currently. And so I'm showing the baseline, just the DOLA forecasts, all these assumptions held, you would have 78 surplus acres of land to accommodate all of the commercial and residential development. But if I assume that there are actually no vacant units and that the market has to kick in with new construction right away to accommodate that growth, that roughly halves the land supply, or at least the surplus, to about 40 acres. So my point is, the number of current residential units on the market that could be occupied now and would not require new vacant land to construct does have an impact here, and whether or not you believe that 86 number from the Census Bureau would be a factor to consider. Another factor to consider, I think, would be, again, we've talked about the land area per household or housing unit density on a per acre basis. And then there was one other that I wanted to flag. The current development pipeline. One thing we've not done is examine recent permit data. So I didn't look at any permit data collected and maintained by the town for 2023, for instance. And it may be that TJ or Preston could speak to this, but one of the stakeholders we spoke to said, well, there's this many units under construction now and they're already coming online, and that would have to net out in the supply one way or another. Either it's land that the assessor still considers vacant, and so I'm including it, thereby overestimating land supply, or if the assessor is not considering it vacant and those housing units are coming online, those are yet to be occupied. And so it would reduce the demand that I am showing from the forecast data. So how many units are under construction is a little bit of an open question, at least from the work that I've done so far, and that would be another factor.
Again, the point here is that we're, again, as we've been going down this path, we're trying to be fiscally responsible, right? That we can certainly do this analysis, but I don't know, to the conversation, I don't know that's going to give us any more information at the moment. And so I really appreciate all the work that Elliot has done. It's been kind of fascinating to see the methodology that leads to what we've been seeing on the ground. One other element that we talked about, that feel free to expand on, like butcher it, but that this also doesn't, specifically the PUD, you know, Ridgway USA PUD across the street there, right? Lot two, yeah. That there is a market demand right now to change things from commercial to residential. There are locations, that being one of them, that really are kind of valuable, more valuable as a commercial property than residential. And so these are considerations and things that will probably have to play into our planning analysis and recommendations and evaluation of your streets, right? That this is basically telling, okay, we have enough supply, we don't need to worry about it too much. But talking about the uses is going to be balancing those uses out on percentage, but also making sure that the right use and the right zoning is in the right location and holding for that. And so again, where that thread is going, I'll go a little bit farther and then I'll shut up, is that that next step really becomes, if you will, an amendment or analysis of the future land use map, not an economic analysis of your inventory, right? And that's where we can start talking about where should this percentage go? Where should that use go, right? And that's where this starts moving to a different type of.
Which was gonna be my next question was, did we come out of this report with like recommendations or like, are we just supposed to remember this presentation and then apply it to future applications?
I mean, my suggestion to do this, and we hadn't really talked about it, but kind of depending on this conversation, wrap it up with some recommendations, some suggestions, and then basically a table that says, here's what the future demand is and uses. And that equates to so many acres. So that at least at some point we go, okay, hey, we need so many acres of industrial, so many acres of commercial. And if nothing else, you have something in front of you or the staff has something to analyze when an applicant comes in or a request comes in. And then put it in a future project, if you will, to update the master plan, which that was done in 2019. And it needs to be looked at every time. So I don't know if now's the time or not, but right, but that's kind of the thought.
We just did that and it was already 5 years ago.
I have a question for Preston. What percentage, and I don't know if you want to answer, what percentage of town's revenue is retail or sales tax? I mean,
It's substantial. I mean, we're.
because you're saying that's a big.
Sales tax is our primary source.
Yeah, it's a primary revenue source. I don't know the percentage. We have a pie chart in the budget, but I mean, it's substantial compared to property tax, lodging tax revenue, stuff like that. What do we budget for? I was probably looking it up because it's somewhere in the report. I think 1.2 or 1.3 in sales tax revenue projected just for 2024.
Okay, thanks.
We don't get very much property tax. We get, the county gets vast majority of their revenue from property tax. We get the vast majority of ours from sales tax.
Sales tax.
So the numbers that I quoted in my report are from your 2024 adopted budget. Shows $530,000 approximately in property tax revenues, about $1.3 million in sales tax revenues, and another couple $100,000 in hotel motel. Lodging tax.
Yeah, I saw the note about somebody saying, oh, we wish there was a hotel, but I don't think we've been approached, have we? Nobody's approached us about wanting to build a hotel.
It's a weird market for hotels now because of short-term rentals. Anyway, I have a question. The report mentions DOLA over and over again. My recollection is that
Census?
Yeah, the census, but the state's, what they call the state's office that deals with.
Demography.
The state demographer's office. Seems like they are the primary ones that do these kind of forecasts, population forecasts. Do they and DOLA match? Is there a difference in your research or?
As I understand it, TJ, you can massage this because you have more experience involved with the state, but my understanding is the demographer's office is housed within the Department of Local Affairs.
Okay, it is.
I figured it was. I just didn't know if it was the same numbers.
So they're the ones producing the DOLA reports.
And it's mind-boggling to me how far off their population is. That's right, for 20.
Bureaucracy.
It's,
yeah.
I don't know what it is. I mean, I really, the state demographer, if you guys don't know that woman, aren't familiar with her, you look her up on YouTube and watch some of her talks. She's amazing. What's her name? Remember? Elizabeth Garner. Yeah, she's incredible, but
she can make stats fun.
Yeah, she really is a great speaker in an area that's very dry. So, again, I just don't understand how the data backs that up.
Yeah, the thing I'll just mention that, because that is true, and you know, work in all towns that don't.
Well, some of it's county, right? The county.
And so they do everything at the county level.
Yeah.
And it has to do with immigration, migration, and birth rates, right? And there's so many things happening at the local level over the last 5 years in particular that are not being captured by those data points. That I will say this though, every time that we reach out, and we didn't do this in this exercise, every time we reach out and start talking about local factors. They're like, oh yeah, let's just turn this knob over here. They are more than happy to adjust their models for local needs. We do it all the time. And so they're very gracious with it, but they are conservative. And so, yeah, that's why jumping up 20% is probably pretty good to just say, hey, we're factoring for some of that.
So who would approach them? You would, the planner? I mean, would John
So-
approach them? Who would approach them to dial the knobs?
Well, they will only publish data, official data at the county level. And then what they do is they do the ratio from there and say, okay, Ridgway has 20% of the county population, so we're gonna take 20% of that growth and attribute it to Ridgway. But,
I wasn't aware of that.
so that's how they generally approach it. But then what happens is we go and say, hey, Ridgway is growing a lot faster than the proportionate share in Uray County. That, you know, it's not going to Uray, it's coming to Ridgway. So let's jump it up. And that's what he's kind of referring to. That's where the 20% comes in. We've done this elsewhere where we ask them to turn knobs. They don't change the official projections, right? They'll just give us kind of a look behind the curtain to show what their model is and what they've thought about. And then
Which
we can
somewhat
say-
validates the research you're doing.
Correct.
They essentially do what we have done here. You know, our dialing up or down of certain knobs is adjusting the assumptions around densities and growth rates and things like that. If we wanted them to do it for us, we could ask to see that and they would share it, but they're never going to put it on the website as the official.
Right.
So to go back to the sales tax question, Michelle, I knew I'd seen this number recently. We had our audit results from last year's operating. And sales tax was over 50% of the income for the town.
That was Pam's question.
For last year.
I mean, because yeah, we're talking about what do we need? We know we need housing, but if we can grow the revenue to help us develop the housing or whatever, keep the town healthy. Yeah, it'll be interesting because, you know, right here on the river, we have a couple dozen units that are gonna get finished probably in the next year. And it'll be very interesting. You know, when the 10 units right by the library went up, they went faster than I thought they would because the price had gone up so much. But now we're talking a huge volume right here on the river. And as small as we are, it's like, yeah, that's a big impact.
So yeah, I look forward to what we do with this information. And you've already touched on it, but like, we'll
Yeah.
keep going. And I'm sure the planner can make better use of it. Town staff can make better use of it than we can, but it's useful and we'll keep using it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of the question of what are the next steps? Does this give us, you all, enough information, and if we give some tangibles, kind of wrap that up with some clear recommendations and a tool? Does that get us what we will need for right now?
Tell us how to dial the knobs.
I think, you know, we do have these challenges of data availability. So when I think about the jobs data in particular, and we think about the difference between commercial services and industry, whether it's light or general industrial, we're not able to figure out how many of those jobs that are all across Uray County are actually in the town right now. So we don't know what the mix across these different industry sectors is in the town. And we have no way to project out how much growth we would expect to see in industrial versus commercial services. And so that's where I think keeping tabs on your stakeholders, engaging them periodically, even if it's in an informal capacity, it doesn't have to be part of any contract. Talk to the folks that have their finger on the pulse of the market and see how they see it shifting. Right now, my recommendation would be, if it's consistent with the town's vision, that's always the caveat, right? I would not zone industrial land for residential. I would keep the industrial land that you have, and I would consider opportunities potentially to expand your industrial land base, because I think they can bring good paying jobs to the town. I do think though, you know, you've got, double check my.
Can I ask Jack a quick question? How much will the new light industrial that's about to come online, percentage wise increase what we already have? 50% more?
Yeah, it's 192,517 square feet of new industrial coming on zone I1 or light industrial. It's probably not quite 50%, but it's more than a third. So between 33 and 50% increase.
Thank you.
You've got 194 acres of land in total that are zoned for future development. That's 21% of the town's land area. It's really just about being strategic in how you plan for those areas. I think that needs to be, maybe some industrial if the location is appropriate, but a mix of residential and commercial to both expand the town's revenue generating capacity, but also to expand housing opportunities. And so in the, had to include one alarmist scenario in the memo, right? I said in scenario 5, what if you grew at the rate that we observed you growing from 1980 or 1990 on? That 3% or 3.2% that I referenced in my presentation. Well, if that happened through 2050, you don't have enough land. And the shortfall is pretty drastic. It's on the order of hundreds of acres. But that rate of growth is unsustainable for any community. It is only really sustainable when communities are very small. And it is very rare in my work. I don't recall a time that I've seen a community sustain a 3 or 3.5% average annual growth rate over 60 or 70 years. So I really think that you don't need to pay too much heed to the alarmist scenario 5, at least for the coming decade. Even if you grow at much faster rates than the forecast data are suggesting, you've got enough land and you can always reevaluate in 5 years or in 10 years if that faster growth continues. Right now, land supply is not the issue. It's just a matter of using the land that you have strategically.
Well, and the master plan's due for another
Thank you.
update soon anyway.
Yeah. Do we have, can you provide us with a map that shows where we have what? And maybe including areas where we've already taken, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't given industrial or residential. We've been requesting that, but I know we've given commercial residential. It would be good to see what we've actually given the land already. If that's feasible. Just so we can kind of see where that light industrial sets today, with the general industrial versus the commercial, where those are, so that as we look at the future development, we can kind of figure out where we might want to locate additional commercial or additional industrial.
It would be very easy, I think. I'd work with Max and TJ to do this, but they have base maps already assembled that would allow them to just display whatever parcels the assessor considers to be vacant, along with an underlay by color of the zoning designation. So I think that's well within reach. Kind of the next step in that analysis, if you're really concerned about how much land you have available, would be to discount things like what we call critical areas, right? That, if there's a wetland or something on the property, the assessor's not showing me that information. They just say it's vacant. Well, could be a vacant parcel, but 90% of it is not buildable. Do you really want to consider that as part of your land supply? But I'm not hearing that those issues are coming up with any frequency, and because the surplus of land is so significant, it might not be necessary at this point in time.
I guess it's just the meeting that I keep getting from TJ about, you need to hang on to your commercial property, so that's where I'm trying to make sure we're looking at those kind of things.
And tagged on to Russ's comment about industrial, you said, you talked to some stakeholders and they were like, geez, we really wish there was more industrial. How much land are they thinking they need that we don't have? Because again, we haven't improved anything other than what Jack's talking about.
Yeah, good question. They did not quantify it in terms of the number of acres. And, again, given these limitations that we have in the data and in kind of zooming in on what's Ridgway versus what's just Ridgway County writ large,
Yeah.
I think it's going to be difficult to quantify that or even to make a reasonable assumption.
Okay.
But one approach you could have is, as you look to update the master plan, do this incrementally. Those updates are periodic. They do happen over time. You could make a meaningful impact to the land supply for industrial uses by rezoning 10 or 20 acres probably, right? I mean, rezoning 20 acres would triple what I was seeing in the assessor's data, and that's the project that Jack's talking about notwithstanding.
Right. Yeah, when they say it isn't here, I'm like,
helps.
well, what were you thinking of building?
I think it's also readily available, right? So right now, the supply is there.
Yeah.
but there's no infrastructure to it, right? So the current in light industrial park, business park, doesn't have any vacant properties. It's all undeveloped property around it. Right, so I would, based on this, I would suspect that once Laura goes in and those become, there's infrastructure there, those would be gobbled up, right? So these are also, I don't know their knowledge of what's coming in or out, right? That's just the high demand side. Where's the number in my head coming from, 6 acres? Was that ever in a conversation we had as far as the average size of like an industrial side lot or something?
I don't recall, but I can do some digging.
Maybe you're just making it up.
I'm just making it up.
I mean, it would surprise me if the average industrial parcel was 6 acres, because the assessor's data is only showing 12.3 acres in total, so that would suggest that you only have 2 industrially zoned parcels. Great at mental math, but you probably have 2.
Well, I mean, as far as the demand, the kind of what people are looking for.
Yeah, just like,
From
if they're,
what size are you looking?
if they're asking, what are they asking for?
Right.
So that we know what to work with, what do we need to do on to meet demand? But if
So
we,
I think I can add some information here for answer Pam's question. In phase 1 and phase 2 of the industrial park that's been developed, the average lot size was 11,000 square feet. Now, so that's probably 35 different parcels and probably 20 different little subdivisions in there, but the average lot size is just a little over 10,000 square feet. So based on our historic use, that's probably what we would see in the future.
thank you.
Probably a quarter acre.
Yeah.
Just put it in the same terms that these tables in the memo.
Do we need to discuss this further at this time?
I'm good.
I think what I'm hearing is we kind of tie up the recommendations out of the report and kind of get it out there and give a tool.
Yeah, I look forward to the recommendations and being able to use this information.
It's great so far.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's good news, so that's always, that's good, right?
And we all appreciate learning. You know, it's like, oh, what don't we know? Well, usually that's a lot. You know, on any given day, I'm like, I don't know. Some more.
The data suggests there is no crisis, no fire that needs to be put out.
No, rest on our laurels for a little while.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks, Elliot.
Elliot, for doing it and explaining it.
My pleasure.
I guess next we've got, who's up next? Presentation and discussion regarding regulations for affordable housing. We'll be able to wrap this one up tonight.
Yeah, simple conversation. This one's actually me. Do you mind sharing? You get to hear from me for a little bit on this, but while that's getting pulled up, I don't know that we need to get too far into this conversation tonight.
Rest assured we will.
Yeah. Because it's been a little bit since we talked about affordable housing. And so we wanted to bring it back up. Really, we've had a lot of conversations, actually we've been pulling Elliot in too, because the affordable economic side of it is important as well. And actually, Elliot has a ton of affordable housing experience in the Pacific Northwest. So his insights have been very valuable. As we started going through this, there are a lot of things to consider. Tell me what you already know when it comes to affordable housing.
Can I make one point that was made earlier tonight that was interesting to me, that whole business of this middle ground, right?
Yes.
That we're hitting the low income, but those middle people are where there seems to be the issue.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that earlier, let's put a pin in that because there's some other things that may go back to what we were talking about related to that. But as we go through this, there's gonna be an administrative entity that is administered, right? We have deed restrictions, the town does not have the staff capacity to administer. You're probably privy or aware of, there's a lot of conversation in the county going on associated with that. And so we didn't touch any of that stuff. We didn't say, okay, we assumed in this discussion that we threw out there for tonight, that's in place. Somebody is administering this. We're not gonna worry about administering. We're setting up the standards for which somebody would administer. The other thing that we didn't do, kind of putting that your comment, into putting a pin in it, setting aside, is that we're not looking at the financing side of it. We're not looking at the affordability. We're not looking at what affordable means and the tiers of it. So what we're doing is breaking it down to what we have identified as the two fundamental elements that go in a land use code. And if you will, they're these two things. They're the method for calculating and the mitigation, the compliance components. And we'll get into that a little bit, but so you have to establish how you calculate what the requirement is. And then you have to provide how you comply with that calculation. Okay, so next slide. And again, we are purposefully oversimplifying it. This is not this simple, but when you start thinking, when we start thinking about the code components, it's these two elements. Jump to the second bullet, right? The equation that we want to be talking about is the measure of impact. So when a development comes in, what impact does that development have on housing and the affordable housing? Or the affordability of housing? And then two times, if you will, multiplied by the rate to mitigate that impact. And then that equals your measure. We'll get into some examples, but we did evaluate 3 communities that are in as an appendix to your report. Telluride, Mount Crested Butte, and Eagle County are the 3. There's tons of ways to approach it, but those are 3 different ways. And in there we have kind of edits or amendments to this equation of what they did a little bit. So next slide.
And I'll just add that, we looked at Telluride specifically because that was a request by town.
Because why?
It was a request by town council to look into Telluride's affordable housing guidelines and code.
As a pretty good local example.
And that all the entities up there, they've got 3 different deed restrictions, or just the town of Telluride?
They all have a slew of a very wide approach and different ways of approaching it. So breaking that equation down a little bit, first and foremost is the measures of it. So these can be 2 different types of impacts. 1, it's jobs, or 2, it's houses. The standard seems to be jobs, right? So as development comes in, it is creating more jobs, and therefore that job is creating the need for more housing. Job creation, independent thing.
Well, the independent factors are what you're saying are those different measures of impact. It's like, what are the things that we're gonna consider moving into? So is it residential uses that are gonna be the ones who have to mitigate all the affordable housing? Is it gonna be industrial uses? Is it gonna be parks, right? It could be any number of things, but the idea is as part of the town's vision, who is responsible for creating the affordable housing issue? And then the other side of that coin is who is gonna be responsible for the burden providing the affordable.
Yeah, and so in the examples, do we have examples in here? Okay, oh, cool. Okay, so one. That's the one component. The second is the mitigation rate. So once we establish the impact, then there's a rate that you can toggle up or down to either require more or fewer, whether it's square footage, or bedrooms or units, right? There's some type of output that says based on this request, you're creating this much demand or impact and you mitigate it this way. Does that at least, feel like I'm making confusing more, but I think it's making sense.
It's tricky, right? I
It is.
know in Tyrod, it was
Yeah.
developer mitigation, right? So if you're developing a commercial building, they would calculate how many employees are you creating with that type of commercial building that you're building? And then there's a certain percentage of that number of employees that you therefore have to create housing for in one of 4 or 5 different ways.
Right, that's exactly it. So the Telluride, the top one there, right,
So-
yep,
What I don't understand is, I understand the impact being job creation. And then where do you put these people? But why are single family, why is any residential considered an impact? Because I thought it was the jobs that create the impact.
Well, it's also, I mean, just clear like a multifamily development. You're gonna bring in so many units, right? So those are gonna create jobs that may end up creating more than the residential development actually provides. And also I would note that places like, I think Mount Crested Butte or even Eagle County, they have a mitigation rate for residential uses at like 20%. They make it really low because you're right. If you're bringing in
Residential
residential
is
development-
service jobs, the need for service jobs.
Because you've got more people that need
Right.
services.
That's why I don't understand why housing is an impact.
So-
Jobs create the impact.
it might not be an actual impact on the affordable component, it's the impact that we're using to create so let's say that, one way to say, I think it's right now, right, that 10% of your units need to be affordable. Right, that's we're using units as the impact,
Yes.
not the number of jobs that those units are creating, it's the number of units that you're proposing
Okay.
sets the requirement for for the number of affordable units.
Okay.
That,
Thank you.
I understand where impact is a little bit confusing
Okay, I got
on
it.
that, but it took the factor.
Okay.
So yeah, in here, these are the equations that we again, we took some pretty complex approaches and tried to synthesize it into a pretty simple elementary math equation. I don't know if this is still how they do this stuff. Apparently there's new math out there. But so tell you, right, they take the number of employees generated, and that is the calculation that they come up with. Right, again, we can come up with that, we're not looking at, okay, what uses create how many affordable jobs, like what that is. We wanna look at this high level right now, right, that's where we want to stay. So they take the number of employees generated by a proposal or a use, they multiply it by 400 gross square feet. That's the factor that they use. And then they multiply that by the percent mitigation. And I don't know what it ranges, but it's pretty high, right? Up to 90% where they want.
Correct.
So they go all the way up to 90% of that factor that you need to provide. And that basically means you have to provide a lot of affordable units, or their mitigation is growth square footage of affordable housing. And they have a whole bunch of ways to meet that or comply with that, but they create square footage of affordable housing. Mount Crested Butte, I actually thought that one was simple, it's not. The way they had it in the code is actually simple, and I like it. But the stuff that goes behind the scenes, and they update it every year to make sure that the numbers, the community housing units are accurate. But they use jobs again, but they use it per square footage, right? So again, they have a different measure there. They multiply it by the employees generated. Is that
Divided.
Sorry, divided, yep, divided by the employees generated and then the households generated, right? So again, it's just different ways to get to kind of the same thing that might work for your community.
One important note about Mount Crested Butte is that they're only focusing on an AMI group of 80% or less. So the units that are created from this calculation, which, with all that dividing, ends up being a pretty low number for just dwelling units that have an AMI restriction of 80% or less.
But there too are dwelling units, not square footage, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a 500 square foot unit or a 2,000 square foot unit.
Yeah, and Mount Crested Butte is just the ski area, it's not the town.
Correct, that is correct, it's up on the hill.
Yeah.
And then Eagle County, very similar, but jobs created, so their factor is jobs created by square footage. So if you come in with 10,000 square feet of commercial, that has a factor that creates so many jobs. Divided by the employees generated, divided by the households generated, same things. Multiplied by that mitigation rate, again, depends on a few different things, creates dwelling units. So.
And one more thing I would add is that any use that you're imagining that like probably shouldn't be responsible for handling out of this. All of these communities have some sort of clause with exemptions, you know. If it's just like a remodel for a single family dwelling, you create, 0.2 units, like they're not required to meet affordable housing requirements. And that's something that we can consider. It was actually exempt from this.
So we have a few things in here, right? Like thinking through jobs, units, square footage, what is the, and that's why I would kind of put it this way. I think it might be easiest, we haven't gotten this in a while, but maybe think through what we want to use at the end, right? Do we want square footage? Do we want bedrooms? Do we want units? And what is that final thing that we're looking for? And then we can kind of back into an equation that creates it. Again, we don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. There are definitely peer communities. We can plagiarize, the nice way to say steal, and come up with something for that, these other elements. I think the point that we want to make with this is that there's a lot of ways to do it, and there are a lot of ways to kind of turn the knobs and crunch the numbers. And a lot of strategies to come up with that. So I think I don't want too much conversation on this component because there's a lot to consider there, but leave you with that of like, hey, let's try to think about it in a simple equation component and see if maybe next month or whatever, there's, we can kind of dial it in a little bit.
Well, and it dovetails nicely with the previous presentation.
Correct.
Which I appreciate.
So how do you suggest we go about this, and like, are we trying to complete this year?
I don't know that we have a real timeline per se, right? I mean, I think this one we want to evaluate and make sure we're getting kind of right. And there's also a lot of other factors that are outside of this conversation.
Because we put 25% in the code.
For the PUDs. So what we're saying is, and what we did, right, is say that for a PUD, you need to provide 25% of your proposed units to be affordable. Right, so there's an
Okay,
example.
so different than.
Because we didn't think through any of this stuff. We didn't have the time to conjure up this stuff. And the number that we were using was 20%. And off the cuff, right, previously.
I guess my concern is that we could go really deep and round and round and round, and we really don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Correct.
We need to lay out, like you said, what is our goal, and then how do we get there, and not like start splitting hairs right from the beginning.
Right, so I agree with you, however, I'm gonna throw this other element.
You're gonna throw in some more complicated.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Go
throw
ahead.
this other element in here, hey, can we do that? Because one of the things that we've been talking about and how it plays into the last conversation is that I'm gonna go ahead and say this is a new approach to affordable housing and affordable housing planning, that usually it's like, okay, cool, we have 200 units of affordable housing. Well, what is that? Does that meet the demand for the revenue, the job incomes in this community? You might have 300 available units, but only 15 or 20 of them are available for the job incomes in the area, right? So one of the other elements that are becoming more mainstream in this analysis is putting strata in there of income levels. So basing it on job incomes in the area. So X% of the jobs in the area are making this income. Do we have enough housing to provide for that income range, right? and break it down to income range.
Well, I think that's a really good point because they sat here and said, oh, but we're not hitting this income range. Guess what? Those people don't work here because there's no jobs here that pay that much. So those aren't workers for Ridgway. Those are people that want to live here that make their income somewhere else, which would have been a really good point to make.
50, is that correct?
Yeah, that was the number they were saying, like, there's very few jobs in this area that pay that amount. The
So-
jobs here pay like $18 to $25 an hour.
So that,
But you also have people who moved here, especially from the pandemic, who are working remotely,
Yeah,
actually making a pretty good salary, but not all of them can afford them.
right, but it's just
So-
interesting that they sit here and say, we need homes for people, for Ridgway people who work in Ridgway. It's like, well, wait a minute, those people aren't employed in Ridgway. Workforce housing. So it's kind of two sides of an argument.
Yeah.
Just because you want to live in Ridgway doesn't mean that, you know, we have to create housing by changing our standards so that you can live here. That's not providing Ridgway workforce housing.
Well,
There's a
good
difference.
example is like you were talking about the dentist. The dental hygienist probably makes $30 an hour. They could afford a nice place, but there isn't one.
right. And so I'm really, we had some conversations with
Appreciate
colleagues
our
up at Mr. Planner too, and it seems to be
What?
the new kind of way. And I think it's really kind of interesting and cool to kind of break it down that extra level. So,
That's
I mean,
Well, TJ noted a lot of my past clients have been in the Pacific Northwest, and the Pacific Northwest states, Washington, Oregon, and I'll include California as well, have been really aggressive in how they require individual cities and towns to plan for affordable housing. And legislation that came out in Washington State 2 years ago now, but is just being implemented. This applies to cities of almost all sizes in Washington, so down to small communities as well, are being required to show that they have the zoned capacity for a specific number of housing units based on a forecast at less than 30% of what is called area median income, which is published at the federal level by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They set it for the county, so it'd be the Ridgway County AMI. And then also at 50% of AMI, 80% of AMI, and up to 120% of AMI. So it's housing for very low income households, that 30% and below. But also for workforce housing, that's that 80 to 120% band. And so there are states that offer models for this, I guess is what I'm saying, where it's not just something that individual jurisdictions are opting into doing, but it's something that in fact state governments are requiring all jurisdictions to do. So we could look at some of those too, if that's helpful, but it's not unheard of, it's just, it's a little new and coming to Colorado, I would say.
I think that's something we definitely need to consider. So we've done some work already on hitting really low AMIs. But it's identifying that there are people who are the missing middle still that need to be taken care of. And I think we need to include that language.
Do we know
But the need to be taken care of part is where I get hung up.
Okay, so just remember that
Need to be
even though
addressed.
people aren't, I mean, we're not giving them anything, maybe making it a little more affordable for them to buy a house, whereas they couldn't before. But what that does is that adds people to your town, that adds tax base, property taxes, sales tax. If they live here, whether their job is here or not, they're helping to promote.
So it's not just super wealthy people that can afford to live here.
Yeah, yeah.
Fair,
That's the goal.
fair. Look at it, he's got something up his
So
sleeve.
I had a meme that I tried to get in one of the presentations and couldn't find it.
Well,
But
tell us what it was.
I can't remember what it was.
Share it when you find it.
Yeah, basically, the affordable housing has always been an issue, and all we're doing is subsidizing it with our current policies.
Exactly.
What we're trying to do with a lot of this is not provide the unit. Require creative thinking to provide a unit at a cheaper value or cheaper cost. And that's different because we're not saying, okay, the market is saying it's $100 and we're gonna throw $50 at it to make it 50, right? That's just inflating the market. And what we want to start doing is trying to find strategies to push market down a little bit. Yes, I did say that softly on purpose.
Well, and the easy one is like, you know,
I don't know how it's happening, but it's like
super
that's-
cheap finishes.
Well, and that becomes somewhat of the problem, but maybe it's new creative kind of things, but I guess as we go through this, what we don't wanna do. Is we don't want to subsidize the market, right? That seems to be the spiral we keep finding ourselves in this conversation. That it is actually increasing the affordability of units, because government subsidies are actually driving the market up. So we wanna be careful about that too. And frankly, what it's doing is, when we do something like this, a developer comes in with, say 100 units, and we're requiring a certain level at 30%. They're still gonna make it, but they're gonna push that up on the upper end, where the market rates are gonna be higher, right? Does that make sense? That the slide is, we're the high end market rate is gonna go up as we require more lower rates, or lower units. So we just need to be careful of all of that.
It seems like a lot of this conversation is philosophical, and do we like separate that and have the philosophical conversation first? And then move into the actual nuts and bolts of it, or is it gonna be dispersed throughout the whole thing where we're just like, oh my God?
Well, I think I guess my reason for saying it is that we should be aware of that, right? We're trying to solve something, but inevitably we're gonna create a problem along the way. Right, and so we need to be checking in on what's our value and what we're trying to accomplish, and are we still moving the needle in that direction?
I'm sorry, I only want easy problems.
We're all out of those. So I mean, I guess with that being said, that's why I think leaving it kind of at this equation level. Right? Is where we should be, and that's the philosophical conversation. Right, do we want square footage, do we want a band of affordable AMI, right, level? Or do we want dwelling units? Right, what are we trying to accomplish? Yeah, and then, I know that, lots of conversations.
So it would be interesting if, and you mentioned the tiered approach of what percentage of our population is in what tier bracket. That would be interesting to know.
You don't happen to know, not necessarily have it, you don't happen to have that information, do you?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but that is something that the Census Bureau would provide through the American Community Survey. Again, that's that same 2022 data that I referenced earlier, so it's not perfectly current, but it gives a pretty good snapshot based on surveys of residents of the town, what the sort of income profile of town residents are.
Okay. American what survey?
American Community Survey, data.census.gov.
Oh, I know, it's like the census site, yeah.
States to create online, we'll change that.
So they do that every 5 years.
So you can just wait a
provide
couple more
data
years?
every year. But
I'd like to make a suggestion here.
Hold on a second, Jack, somebody was talking.
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna clarify, TJ said they do that every 5 years. They provide data every year, but the survey data are collected over a 1, 3, or 5 year period, depending on how big a margin of error you can tolerate. The 1 year data has a significantly higher margin for error.
Yeah.
The 5 year data, we've spent 5 consecutive years up to 2022 actually doing the surveys, has a lower margin.
Makes sense.
Jack?
I would like to make a suggestion here that we require a number of units for the development, and then within that requirement, we have different levels. We have so many at 80%, so many at 100%, so many at 120% within our requirement. Just not like Crest Butte has just required at 80% AMI. I think that's a mistake. We need to have different levels within our requirement.
Okay,
So that's the first aspect.
Oh, shit.
All right, solved, done. No, that's helpful, Jack, and, jumping ahead, which might be the simpler conversation. Is, we talk about a lot of these, right? How do you comply with that? Because it might be a number of units, but there are a lot of ways to meet that obligation. And so these are in priority order, right? No, we want to put them in priority. But so, and these are all in the staff report or the memo. So you can either provide, you can construct the unit on site, right? You're doing a 100-unit development and you deed restrict one of those and that meets that obligation, checks the box. That's almost the best because you have it right then and there. Then you can construct units within the town somewhere else on a different project. I'll just jump right into it and say, or the next one outside of town. The big conversation that I was involved in was actually Bethel Health in Eaton County, that they might have developed in Eagle or Edwards, but they had a whole development somewhere else in the county that they wanted to attribute for it. So that made a whole lot of sense, that they could kind of meet that need, not necessarily right where you are, but somewhere else. And then the payment or fee in lieu. That would be, instead of putting the unit in, you pay the town to build to it. And I'm seeing head shaking no, and as we prioritize these things.
We had
Yeah.
the discussion.
Yep. And so again, I don't necessarily want to throw it out yet. I know where a lot of people stand on it, but one of our thoughts, at least through this conversation, is as you go down in priority, you go up in cost.
Exactly.
Relative cost.
Exactly.
So make it easiest to provide the unit. Make it hardest to pay the town to do it later on. Right, whatever that looks like, I don't know, but almost, you can almost see that.
Yeah.
And I know a couple of communities have put a limit on the payment. I think they're like, we can't pay more than like 10%.
So
I think it's a good part of the whole picture.
Yep. And then, yeah, of course, all of these things have a whole bunch of provisions. These are kind of, again, starting the conversation, throwing it all at the wall. Where do we want to start? Where do we want to dive in? Conveyance of land. Again, a decent thing, right? Some of the most impactful or costly parts of the development are the land and the infrastructure, right? So if you can get land, that's helpful, but it doesn't build a unit. And that's many years down the road, especially if someone like the town or this land bank entity, whatever it is, has to build that wealth to build them, right? You're talking years down the road, so the impact is not very good from a timing standpoint. And then deed restricted and price capped and kind of those elements that have to do with, again, these are broad brush strokes. That bottom bullet is what I was saying before, that doesn't really decrease the overall affordability, basically subsidizing housing that way. Of course, all of this is some type of subsidy, but that bottom run there is more so basically paying the difference somehow.
Or the idea that the developer just gives you something that's already on the board. Deed restrict that.
Yeah, I know for the Alpine Bank building, when it went up at Tyrod, they bought a unit at, which was called Gold King at the time, it's Otter Creek now, and they put a deed restriction on it. So they bought it and then sold it for a couple $100,000 less than what the fair market value was on it. And then a bunch of homeowners associations then put into their HOA rules that wasn't, they couldn't do that. Cause they thought that brought their property value down. So it's, you're chasing the curve.
Yep. So I think that's it.
We have those
Yeah.
4 questions to kind of help. wrap
Yeah.
your brains around this.
We kind of already did, but I mean, I guess, I don't know, it's been kind of a long night. I don't really want, like I said, don't know that we're gonna have a substantive conversation about any of these. I think I really just want to kind of plant some of those seeds. And what it sounds like is the next few months we'll be focusing on this, which.
So will you be coming to us with like recommendations? First, we'll have the what's the process?
You mean,
how do we go about doing this? Like, are we just gonna talk about it for 3 months? Or are you gonna come with like, here's what we suggest?
Well, I mean, I like, I guess, give us some guidance, right? So how we've done the other stuff is, we've said, here's kind of the best practices, here's what we're seeing out there, here's some options. What do you think works best here? So should we focus on doing square footage? Should we focus on number of units? Should we focus on, the other one? Number of rooms, right?
Yeah.
Well, what is that output that we're looking for?
So we should read through this again for next month and come back with some ideas.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. I think that this is too much to say, hey, which one do you think we should work on now? I think we should probably think about it, think about the impacts, and then we basically come back next month and talk these through.
Well, we had 2 people missing too, so, but making the point like, okay, we already have this information in this packet, so you don't have to wait till the Friday before the meeting and try to read it all over the weekend, because that can be challenging, but to encourage everyone on the planning commission, and maybe we send out like a email reminder, like, hey, read through this section again in this month's packet and come back with some ideas on this.
I think
Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, because I guess.
I'm good.
Like,
with
do
that.
some homework.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yes, Madam Chairman.
And there'll be like some questions to see if you've done it, like what did Max put in there about the parking regs, remember? Death, the penalty was death back in Rome if you parked in the wrong zone, right? And we brought it up at the meeting and a bunch of people had no idea what we were talking about. We're like, ha, you didn't read everything. So be quizzed on.
So we'll just keep kind of getting a little bit more, acclimated to some of these approaches and just plan on having a little bit of a deeper conversation next month on what factors work best in Ridgway.
And have you done this? Another place?
With housing mitigation?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you're like, whoop.
Do we have any projects coming to us next month?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Maybe.
Maybe a lot, the last one application.
So pretty simple. Because that's the thing to keep in mind is like, we're willing to throw in an extra meeting if ever that's, there's projects coming in, and it's gonna hold us up on really having these in-depth conversations.
There may be one,
the town on platform, trust you.
Yeah, so one, maybe 2, but again, pretty simple hearings. And then
Great.
for all we're talking about is this, hopefully those wrap up a half hour and spend an hour.
And
On this.
was there more stuff on our list in addition to this, that overall, we're on the last biggest item?
Yeah, so next month, hopefully we have a final report. Probably no presentation on it, probably just make sure that's in your packet. It's probably the best way to get it to you. If what I'm hearing is correctly on the inside, and then we'll bring this.
Well, thanks for all your work on leading up to this, guys. Elliot, if we don't see you again, we appreciate all the work that you did. I know statistics probably get.
Housing affordability stuff, but
Okay.
I'll leave that to TJ's discretion. But yeah, it's been great. Thank you all.
Right?
And Max, you're coming along for the ride?
Of course.
Okay. Anything else you want, any answers from this week, this month, right now?
No.
Good. I think we've got minutes approval.
I move to approve the minutes of the regular meeting from July 2020.
One small edit, I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay.
You have me as in attendance.
But you're always here.
I'm usually here, but I wasn't.
He wasn't last
I
time.
wasn't even on Zoom. Small edit, and then I'll stay.
So I move to approve those minutes with the fact that John was.
Second. We get a roll call vote on it, I guess, because everyone's not here in person.
Okay, Commissioner Foister,
Aye.
Petroselli,
Aye.
Clark,
Abstain.
yes, of course. Oh, God, a long day for me.
It's all right.
Was in junction at 9. Meyer
Yes, aye.
and Chairperson Montague.
Yes. Thank you. Updates from the planning commissioners. You got any updates, people?
I think so.
Russ broke ground on his ADU.
All right.
I have a question. I read in the paper where the Dalwhinnie had the river property, the river subdivision plat extended. And that just goes to council, that doesn't come back through planning?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen it at all, not since I've been on here.
That's a good question, though, Jack, to see if maybe some of these, we talked about that with the, what was the other one we had recently?
Green Street Park.
No, there was another,
No, I think the industrial park got extended a dozen times, and this one's been extended half a dozen times. I mean, I'm not suggesting any foul play here. It just seems like
no,
maybe we
it's-
should be revisiting some of this.
having planning commission review is not a bad idea. It's something we should talk about.
Okay.
Not a bad idea at all.
I mean, that subdivision, that Dalwhinnie, I remember, been around since before before 2008 bust. And those are different lots than we're looking for today as a planning commission. And I would like to revisit as a planning commissioner, and just speaking for myself.
Well, I mean, we did discuss things like applying the UROD to it. I mean, there's infrastructure in the ground. The roads are roughed in. It would be a real mess to try and go back to the drawing board on that. And I mean, it sounds like you're suggesting that the lots can be configured, and I'm not sure how we would do that. I mean, I think your point is that we shouldn't be approving these multiple extensions of a preliminary plat when over time conditions change, but.
That's my point. I'm not trying to redesign. My point is that things change.
So
Yeah.
are you suggesting that they just come back and give us an update, since most of us weren't on the commission at that time?
I think we would have good input, yes.
No, I'm not, like John said, we're not gonna change it, but we could be educated on it.
I think it's something that staff should discuss amongst themselves and see. Hopefully, the two that we're talking about are getting closer than ever to actually getting complete, and then in the future, we'll be a whole lot less likely to give multiple extensions like we have.
Oh, come on, Pam, I'm gonna want to change it.
I didn't say that.
No, I did.
But I don't know whether you're kidding or not, but
No, I was kidding about changing it.
but it's a point taken, and Preston and Angie are on notice to take a look at that and see. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be a common occurrence in the future. Hopefully.
Yeah, I think we should consider putting a limit on the number of extensions. I mean, probably some developer friends of mine might shoot me for saying that, but I think that's something we should consider.
I agree. I wouldn't disagree at
Of
all.
course, there's probably been, what, 3 different owners involved
Yep.
since the initial preliminary plat, so. It's had its fair amount of rework just because of different owners and different concepts, so.
That's more to my point, Russ. I mean, I think the fact that the utilities on the ground is not our fault.
We faced the same thing across the street here, right, where they tried to come back with that project because the utilities are there. And said they couldn't make it better because, right?
Right. We did.
Well, it's
And that's
a
the same.
Yeah, overall.
So is that something that we can do when we give an approval, is limit the extensions that we're gonna be willing to put on it?
Town council would do that, Michelle. I don't think we could do it.
Okay.
That's town council's prerogative.
Yeah, your questions about putting a time limit on the extension of the approval, yeah. And that was, as John was talking about, was, you know, one of the options for consideration. The request was for 3 years. Town staff ended up recommending, I think, 2 years. That was ultimately what was approved. And you know, denying the extension request is always an option, but I mean, it was thrown around and considered, you know, different time limits, not just for that extension request, but for all of them that have come before the town council, at least in my time.
Well, and it seems like that direction would have to come from staff, because I don't know that the people that come and go on council are gonna have the insight to be like, wait a minute. You know, they've never even seen, some of them have never even seen it before, right? So it'd be up to staff to be like,
Well, we
well,
try to do some pretty thorough, comprehensive presentations as much as you can, you know, background information, the hopes that the staff report provides some pretty good background, you know, but like with the preserve, that one's pretty, as Russ was saying, you know, some ownership changes, or at least I think that's what you were referring to, because it's a very convoluted background. Doesn't come with all of them, but that's probably the quintessential example of a very convoluted and a lot of backstory related.
well, even you inherited some of that, right? It started way before you got here.
I use the statement for both. You were still in high school when that.
Oh, but now we're going.
I didn't say it, both said it. I wasn't gonna.
Yeah, but you repeated.
Anyways, that's what Jack is saying, is like, we would back staff on this for what it's worth, but we're the planning commission and you're saying this is a council thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, as John was saying, and we read y'all loud and clear, we can look at, you know, codifying this or just bringing it back to maybe something that we could just do administratively back to planning commission before bringing it to town council. We've just been following what our understanding had always been done.
Yeah, and in Jack's defense, I mean, I don't think we want to make it impossible for developers, but it also has to be within reason.
I have a suggestion here. We could also let town council know that they could kick it back to us at their discretion. So town council say, you know, I think this should go back to the planning commission. So they have the power there. So they could suggest that.
I think it's unlikely to come from them.
I don't.
Okay.
Well, this is a stay tuned item.
It's a good point. Thank you, Jack.
Yes, Madam Chair,
Do you have anything else?
I'm done.
TJ does.
So just one thing, we talked a little bit about the staff is gonna be running into heading into budget season. And so we want to talk about that next month.
The chairs,
Projects.
the nicer chairs for the town council and the planning commission to sit on and staff.
Yeah, it was
Sorry, I
about,
just thought of it.
I think it was last September, let's see, August 27th, it's last September, I think, where TJ had put together a pretty good memo. There was a really robust conversation here about, remember the buckets?
Mhm.
Buckets of code updates and special projects, if you will.
Yeah.
We'll have to revisit what was put together. You know, TJ, I think, did a great job of capturing, you know, the buckets of special projects. So for next month's meeting, we are slated to have a couple public hearings. We could talk more about the affordable housing regs. Hopefully y'all have some time to digest that and provide some more guidance for staff to turn around something more concrete. Beyond that, we'll need to have a budget discussion for 2025. I will tell you, the work plan and strategic plan that was put in place, partly partly guided by planning commission's recommendations for what to take on in 2024, was a lot. It was, I mean, just.
So we spent a lot of our money. We might not be able to spend as much next year.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Planning commission doesn't have money, but I think what I'm trying to say is, I mean, you saw the fruits of a lot of labor tonight with those two ordinances, the ADU regs and the parking regs, which Max presented the timeline. We kicked that off. Was that January, February?
Mhm.
And we're here almost in September. that was a lot. And then, Elliot's worked with the land use mix, and then we're still not even with the affordable housing stuff.
Well, I wonder if the affordable housing will go over into next year, and so will that need to be then rebudgeted?
And we can talk about this next month, but that's what I'm getting at, and I think we'll just need to be very thoughtful about how we, what we want to take on.
So we can have a vacation next year.
As you said it, not me, but I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying, let's be very thoughtful about what to recommend to the town council. It's great to be ambitious, but we want to be realistic too.
One, I think where this work plan came out of was the recommended things we should look at when we did the code update, right? We said, what are the things that we need to look at more closely? And then tonight you said this was one of the last items from that list.
No.
Oh, no? This is one of the last things we identified to work on this year.
Right.
There's more
So
stuff.
that's what Preston's talking about. So next month I'll prepare a memo.
Because
So I
there,
back that spreadsheet.
To say, okay, this is what we worked on, this is what's still left.
there are more buckets.
Yeah, there's more buckets. And
Okay,
that's a good point too. A lot of it came out of the chapter 7 of those conversations.
Right.
So that's exactly right.
well, and we continue to make the point, like with parking and affordable housing. If we're not constantly working on something, I mean, we're already behind. We're certainly behind with the developer mitigation. But if we're not constantly working on something, we're just getting further behind. How much that thing has to cost, that's different, but it seems like we should always be working on something. Maybe not to the extent that we have this past
So
year.
I think, what we're talking about is we took on 4 major projects. That significant time both for you and staff, and also cost, right? So I think that's what.
And before that, it was the code update, right? That was that all last year?
That was 2023. Yes, we finished that about a year ago. And then, ran into this stuff this year.
Well, and it created exactly what we wanted to, a lack of applications. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know that was the direct result, but that's what happened.
Well, it gave us time to do this.
I have a question. I think back during that time when we were working on the code updates, we extended the amount of time that staff needed to review applications. Was that a temporary thing? And have we stayed at that level? Where did we go with that?
Oh, that was, so I think what you're referring to is at some point we said, hey, it's gonna give us 60 days or something for this review. The current requirement is 14 calendar days from submittal, there's completeness, and then it's a 21-day review process.
So that was temporary and that went away.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And we're now in that phase.
And will that change with having a planner on staff? Will that happen more quickly, or that's our goal, that's where we should be?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you wanna leave us with any imparting word?
No, we can aim for it to be quicker, certainly, but that's like what should maybe be in the code.
Well, the code requires within 14 days. It's all based on workload. Right.
Flexibility is always nice, but.
Yeah.
Just like try to process things as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but we want it to be reasonable for you, so you don't run out of here screaming and then we look for 3 more years for another town planner. So, great.
Right here, guy.
You? Do we have anything else? Jack?
Sure. Thanks, everybody.
In regards to like this whole conversation about resident requirement.
Right. Okay.
The reason I